Lottie Pion still remembered that day clearly. At the time, it had seemed completely ordinary. Then, suddenly, a voice rang out. It was accompanied by a blinding light that made her freeze in place. The voice asked her name, asked if she was Lottie Pion. Startled, the young woman answered honestly that yes, she was. But when she looked up, doubt bloomed in her chest. Something about the scene felt fundamentally wrong. This couldn't possibly be real. The creature before her, no, that thing, told her it had come to give her a task. There were gods in this world. They performed miracles and observed all things from afar. Above them all stood the main god, and beneath him existed 12 lesser gods. Lottie had never been one of them. So she never once imagined that God himself would decide to address her directly. The creature ordered her to prepare the elixir of immortality for the gods. Her voice trembled as she asked what such an elixir even was, and why it was necessary. The god replied calmly that he understood how impossible such a task would be, even if she devoted an entire lifetime to it. That was why he would grant her a new life. Shocked, Lottie watched as God touched her forehead, leaving behind a mark. He declared that if she succeeded, if the elixir were created, she would be worshipped throughout her life. The gods would recognize her and elevate her to stand among the 12. She could only stare at him, stunned, wondering if he was truly serious. This new life, he explained, meant that she would study herbs endlessly until she fell into eternal sleep, and even after that. Naive and overwhelmed, Lottie agreed. And so, her new life began. She spent many years immersed in the study of herbal medicine, her research advancing at a phenomenal pace. Yet during that first life, she became entangled with one particular man, someone who would continue to haunt her across reincarnations. Less than a year later, he fell into eternal sleep and was reincarnated as a 3-year-old child. Only after growing up again did Lottie regain her memories, finally understanding everything clearly. By then, it was too late. She should have known things would go wrong. The timing of memory restoration and the cycle of reincarnation were completely random. Worse still, with each reincarnation, herbal medicine seemed to degrade rather than improve. Now she could only scream internally, wondering why things kept getting worse. In one life, she even realized she would need to develop a cure for hair loss. Her first reincarnation turned her into a goblin, and she did nothing but scream about what kind of cursed fate that was. In her second life, herbal knowledge lagged behind her growth. By her fourth life, the situation had barely improved. In her fifth life, a dragon visited her. After sharing a drink together, they became friends. At last, she thought things were looking up. In her next life, she was finally born into a long-lived race, a mermaid. Unfortunately, she had absolutely no idea how to study herbs underwater. To make matters worse, she discovered she was a terrible singer. In her seventh life, she regained her memories only to immediately fall into eternal sleep when the Demon King destroyed everything. In her eighth life, she was reborn as an elf. With proper care, she could have lived for 1,000 years. Yet only 10 years after her memories returned, she contracted a rare elven disease and once again fell into eternal sleep. By her ninth life, she finally succeeded. She created the elixir. It was imperfect, but it was good enough for the gods. God, however, disagreed. He told her it was insufficient, that only a perfect elixir would allow her ascension. Lottie argued that this was the absolute limit of her capabilities and begged to be allowed to choose her next life. God refused. Instead, he sent her directly into another reincarnation. As she fell, Lottie wondered if she had been thrown into the underworld. She briefly considered whether she should punch whoever had pushed her. When she opened her eyes, she remembered everything. She had been reborn again. Above her stretched the same sky as on the day she first met God. She imagined the gods hiding behind the clouds, sitting comfortably, sipping the elixir she had made, fully aware that she would once again fall into eternal sleep. Something inside her snapped. Suddenly, the little girl began to run. A knight shouted after her, asking where she thought she was going. But Lottie ignored him. She ran up the stairs, burst into a room, and screamed at the top of her lungs, declaring to all the gods and all the people of this world that Lottie Pion was going on strike. She was tired. She screamed that she didn't want to work anymore and stormed down the corridor, deciding that the first thing she would do was examine this new body. She guessed she was 13 or 14, though she wondered if she would even remember that later. Looking into a mirror, she noted that she was actually quite cute. Then she coughed. Red liquid stained her hand. Calmly examining herself, she realized she was suffering from a pulmonary disease, yet nothing hurt. This body had a limited lifespan, and her situation was precarious. Still, she decided it wasn't a big deal. Life could be extended in many ways. Becoming an 8th-level mage would increase her lifespan. If that failed, she could become a sword master. Spiritual kinship or divine power would also work, though she had neither. At that moment, a knight burst into the room and shouted at her, "Princess." The word stunned her. The knight said he had been searching for her everywhere. She noticed the emblem on his armor, the Kingdom of Pandarion, and asked if he was its knight. He confirmed it. And yes, he repeated, she was a princess. So it was true. The Kingdom of Pandarion had existed for over 1,000 years, and she was its princess. Power, money, resources. She smiled. Even with a weak body, expensive elixirs could extend her life. Tired, she asked the knight to take her home. When she entered her quarters, shock struck her again. The room looked less like a princess's chamber and more like a prison, because it was both. She was informed that this prison cell was also the room of Her Royal Highness Lottie. Slowly, she realized that in this life, her name was simply Lottie. Claiming memory problems, she asked if she was the king's illegitimate daughter, or perhaps the child of a second wife. No? Had she committed some crime? No. Finally, the knight explained. She had been arrested for attempting to poison the former queen. After he left, Lottie sat alone in silence, wondering what kind of madness this was. No matter how hard she tried, she always ended up sick, talentless, imprisoned, or worse. At least she hadn't been executed yet. Under normal circumstances, she could have surrendered to eternal sleep and been reborn. But she had declared she would no longer make elixirs. That meant karma awaited her if she died now, and she would need to find another way out. First, she decided to freshen up. She approached a bucket, only to find no water inside. Instead, she saw spirits shaped like droplets. They stared at her in shock and asked if she could see them. Lottie understood immediately. She couldn't summon powerful spirits, but she could control lesser ones. One of the droplets sensed the aura of the Spirit King and asked if she had a contract. After a moment, they asked her one final question. Was she a traveler? The girl replies that she is more of a tramp and asks to bring some water to wash herself. She recalls that spirits and sentient beings often called her companion. The spirits bring water and ask if it is clean enough. After washing herself, the young lady realizes that, when she dives into memories, she always mentally returns to the Kronos forest in the center of the continent. Thousands of monsters, orcs, trolls, and even dragons live there, and in the very center stands its tower. This is her heavenly laboratory, where dangerous experiments pose no threat. There were rare herbs growing nearby, but the problem was that this body could not withstand long life. So she'll have to stay here for a while. Besides, she was caught trying to poison someone, and it's a miracle she wasn't executed right away. The girl wonders why she wasn't put into eternal sleep, but at that moment the door opens. Someone calls her a mudblood. It turns out to be a young man with red eyes. With black hair, he laughs and says that the mudblood has lost her memory. He asks if she thought that trying to put the queen into eternal sleep would hide her origins. The girl is surprised, and the boy shouts to ask if she is listening to him. She answers with a smile that no, and this makes the guy angry. The girl asks who he is, since he knows about her memory loss. Lottie guesses who he might be, and the young man confirms. Before her stands the second prince of the kingdom of Pandarion, named Arkan. She falls silent for a moment. Then she calmly addresses him by name, and he demands to be called Prince Arkan. The girl asks why, and looking at him, thinks what is wrong with him. She understands very well what her life was like here, and how her family abused her. Society was also pressuring her, and she began to respond in kind. Lying down, she sighed and turned to Arkan. She asks if he really wants her to call him prince, considering she tried to put the queen into eternal sleep. So she asks the boy to tell her what happened, hoping that the memories will return if he explains everything. The guy notices that the young lady has changed, hesitates, but still says that Her Majesty lost consciousness when they were drinking tea alone. The inspector checked the tea that the girl gave to the queen, and the maids showed what kind of tea they had brewed. So the young man points his finger at her and claims that this proves her guilt, asking if she understands. The girl just smiles and thanks Arkan, and he shouts, asking if she even heard his words. The main character understands that everything is obvious, and the reason why the princess, in poor health, allegedly tried to put the queen into eternal sleep was far-fetched. But that doesn't matter now, because the accusations are false. The young lady says she needs to step out for a bit. She adds that she has a lot to do, and it's time for her to go, but the knight asks her to wait, and at that moment, someone else runs up to her. It turns out to be a prince, who stands in front of her and sharply refuses. He states that a criminal cannot just get out of prison. The knight adds that the king ordered the girl to be put into eternal sleep if she runs away again, so he asks her to return. Lottie thinks his efforts are cute but pointless, and asks Arkan to calm down. She says she wants to go for a walk because it is a privilege of being a member of the royal family of Pandarion. Both are surprised, and the young lady continues that even if a member of the royal family commits a crime, he is allowed to go out with an escort and be in the restricted area. One of the servants confirms her words, and the prince wonders why he didn't know about this before. The girl explains that vassals or relatives usually accompany them. But to her, he's nothing. The young man hesitates, but still takes the girl's hand. He says that everything is fine, and one of the servants asks His Majesty to wait. The young man suddenly freezes and realizes that he has become her escort, and the girl thinks that it only just dawned on him. After some time, the king asks what the young man wanted to say. The girl steps forward and notices that the father is looking at the child in a completely different way than he should. The king turns to Arkan and asks what he was thinking when he brought the criminal to him. The young man is very nervous and tries to explain something to the great king. The main character stops him and asks him not to blame Prince Arkan because it was her request. The king asks if she really asked, and the girl says that she wants to clear her name. The king notes that he heard about the memory loss and asks how she plans to prove her innocence. The girl thinks that the conversation between father and daughter should be different, but she is glad that he does not ignore her. Suddenly she remembers something and realizes that the conversation with the king will not be easy. While her life is in danger, she decides to put it off until later. The young lady says she has one request. The prince asks worriedly what it is. She comes closer and assures him that it will not take long if she is allowed to meet with the former queen. She promises to prove she was framed. The king replies that the queen's condition is extremely grave. He asks if the girl would like him to take her to the queen and then orders the criminal to be returned to prison. But the main character insists that 1 hour will be enough to clear her name. The prince whispers that she has gone crazy because if something goes wrong, she will fall into eternal sleep, but the girl asks not to worry. The king agrees and the main character smiles, realizing that time is short, but she will manage. However, the man immediately clarifies that he is only giving her 30 minutes and the girl is shocked. She wonders if all this is the work of that god and heads to the queen's chambers. Seeing her on the bed, the girl understands that her condition is worse than expected. Her breathing is weak, but it is not due to her age. It's not poison. This means the queen ate something unsuitable, and the tea leaves she was given were ordinary. They were popular in the capital and didn't stand out in any way. The girl says there was no poison in the tea, even though she was held in custody. The servant reports that the results of the inspection were received only 2 days ago. The girl asks if other products were checked, but she is told that the queen lost consciousness immediately after drinking tea. They didn't find any poison in either the tea or the cup. The girl is wondering if she missed something. And suddenly he remembers one detail, beginning to guess the reason. 2 spirits confirm that the tea was fine. The girl replies that she thought so. She thanks them and realizes that the problem really lies elsewhere. At this point, they announce that time is up and ask if the princess has finished her inspection. She allows entry. The king and 2 of his confidants enter the room. The girl notices a smirk on the face of one of them. She thinks that this man is clearly neither a knight nor a servant. The king sits down and says she can begin. The young lady agrees, stating that the problem isn't the tea, and in the water. The man objects, saying it's from a spring, but the girl understands better. This is a spring created by fairies, and such water fills the body with energy. It enhances the flavor of food and is consumed by all members of the royal family, so the question arises as to why only the queen was affected. The girl explains that this water is not suitable for people with poor health, especially if you brew tea in it. She understands that such a brew produces a dangerous reaction, and the queen was the weakest in the palace. The man asks if she means to say that the spring water is to blame. The heroine confirms this. The king asks the butler if there is any tea left. He answers in the affirmative, and the king orders tea to be brewed with spring water. Soon the tea is prepared, and the girl realizes that she is ready to prove her innocence. But to do that, someone has to drink it. One of the close associates apologizes and says that proving the mixing of products is difficult and will take time. He suggests that the princess herself drink the tea. The girl falls silent for a moment. She understands that in terms of health, she is closest to the queen, but they are clearly trying to force her, and she is considering whether to refuse or take the risk. The king declares that there is no need for this, which surprises those around him. The man says he will try the tea himself, but another servant asks him not to. He says they don't know how to treat the consequences, but the king decides to drink personally. He adds that the princess seems to know a cure. The girl smiles. She confirms this, and the king asks Marquis Floyd if there is enough evidence. The Marquis agrees, but is clearly angry. The young lady looks at him more closely. She thinks he looks too irritated. At this point, the king takes the cup. He drinks his tea, puts down his mug, and is silent for a moment, then nods. He feels something strange, but not enough to make him lose consciousness. The girl says that's how it should be. She explains that the difference in age and body condition affects the symptoms, and for the king, it is only a slight stomachache. The king acknowledges the similarity with the previous incident and asks if the queen's grave condition is related to her age. The girl replies that the reason is improper treatment. All medications were prescribed as if she had been poisoned. And if you treat the wrong thing, the condition only gets worse. The king orders the chamberlain to conduct a second examination and prepare a medicine according to the princess's prescription. The chamberlain confirms the order, and the main character realizes that the charges are finally dropped. This means that she will return to normal quarters, eat well, sleep and rest, and then eat, sleep, and enjoy life again. She thinks the king might want to reward her. And she thinks about what exactly to ask for when she is approached. Looking up, the girl sees the king in front of her, who says that he has a question. She thinks when he comes up, but says that she is listening, and the king asks where she got such knowledge. He asks if she received them herself. The girl understands what he means. She replies that she studied on her own, and the man closes his eyes and sighs heavily. He says she must be tired and leaves. After a while, the young lady goes to the queen's palace. Looking at the building, she thinks it is a palace, but notices how dilapidated it is. Looking around the garden, the girl is surprised by its neglected appearance. Inside, she sees furniture that is ready to fall apart at any moment and experiences a strange feeling. Everything resembles a dollhouse. Soon, a servant leads her to the princess's room. The young lady realizes that the room is small but very cozy. Compared to prison, this is a huge difference. The girl turns to the servant. She apologizes and asks how many people are assigned to her. The servant says he only knows of one maid. At that moment, footsteps are heard. The girl turns around, wondering who it is. She sees a maid who addresses the princess with tears in her eyes. The servant explains that this is her personal maid and asks to be allowed to leave. The maid cries and says that she knew that the mistress was not capable of such a thing, but no one believed her. The young lady wonders if this is really her personal maid and tries to reassure her. The girl says that she is incredibly happy about the lady's return and was very worried about her, but she carefully asks Miss Lottie, "Why is she so silent today? Usually she is a woman of few words, but now she seems completely different." The main character is surprised and asks if this is really true, while simultaneously wondering if they were closer in this life. She understands that she should actually remember this life, but her head is empty now. That's why she honestly says that she has lost her memory and doesn't remember anything, realizing that this is a chance to learn everything again. The maid, in shock, asks if the mistress really has lost her memory and begins to cry and blame herself. She says it happened because she failed to deliver the daily medication on time. The girl falls to the floor, apologizes, and says that she should have taken better care of her mistress. The main character grabs her hands and loudly says that it is not Betty's fault and it was just an accident. She asks not to blame herself, but the maid tries to object. Betty says that she is the only maid in the palace and that they were always alone here. Looking at her, the main character realizes that their connection was much deeper than she thought. She thought foolishly that the loss of memory would not affect anyone, but now she simply hugs the maid. The girl apologizes for the fright and asks for help in restoring her memories when Betty calms down. After all, Betty is the only one she can trust. The maid smiles sincerely. She promises to help and begins to tell the story, briefly. Lottie is 15 years old, and Betty is the same age. The crown prince stands over them, and the crown princess, and Arkin below. And there is a war for the throne between the elders, because they are the same age and both are extremely talented. Akron is a little inferior to them, but he is much better than Lottie previously thought. Then the young lady asks why everyone hates her, since there is nothing outstanding about her. The maid replies that in fact, the mistress is not Her Majesty's biological daughter. The main character, in shock, says that she heard that she is not illegitimate. Betty explains that Lottie is officially recognized as the daughter of the king, whom he brought to the palace 10 years ago. The queen accepted her as her own, and now the main character feels that everything is falling apart. If even Betty knows about it, then everyone knows. Lottie remembers the king's question about knowledge and realizes that he was talking about her real mother. Now it is clear to her why the queen and the others hate her, but she does not understand why the king adopted her. Betty says that's not the point now, and Lottie thinks it's unlikely that anything could be more surprising. The maid informs them that they have no food left and they will have to starve. Lottie is shocked, and Betty adds that there are only some sprouted potatoes and asks if she should boil them. The main character refuses and offers Betty a rest, promising to find food. Betty suggests going to work at another palace for money, but Lottie says there is no need. At that moment, someone bursts into the room, and, turning around, the girl sees the prince. He asks why it's so dirty, and Lottie thinks he could be sympathetic. After a while, they are already sitting at a luxurious table and eating. Betty says the food is incredibly delicious, and Lottie agrees. The prince asks if they have cooks. And are they really starving? Betty replies no, they just haven't eaten for days, and the prince says that's what hunger is. Lottie asks why Arkin came. He looks away and says it just happened and he was worried. Lottie asks if this is true, and he shyly shouts that he wasn't worried at all. The girl says she was worried about him. Arkin is surprised and asks if this is true. Lottie replies that yes, they didn't have time to talk, and she was afraid the king would punish him. Arkin says she's in no position to worry about him. The main character thinks how cute he is, but suddenly notices something strange. Looking closely at his hand, she sees a fresh mark, similar to a burn. That evening, Lottie thinks about what she saw and realizes that if he were older, she wouldn't have been so upset. She always kept a distance, clearly separating family and friends. This was the only way she could fully immerse herself in science, but children were always an exception. Therefore, she decides to help him. The main thing is not to fall into eternal sleep herself. At this moment, someone tells Miss Lottie that it's time for her to get ready. Lottie agrees, and Betty asks where they are going. The main character says she needs to clean up. After a while, she's completely exhausted. She says they finally arrived and thinks she nearly went crazy on the way. Betty asks if this is the prince's palace, and Lottie replies that she has something to do here. At this point, someone apologizes for Princess Lottie's late meeting. It turns out to be a servant who offers to take her to the living room, and the girl agrees. A little later, Lottie is drinking tea, and the man says he brought what she asked for, and she thanks him. The servant hands over a list of servants, maids, and all the staff of Her Majesty's palace. The main character notices something odd. The palace has many rooms, but only a few are used. The dining room cannot be entered, and the other open rooms are completely devoid of furniture. Moreover, there are almost no products, and their quality leaves much to be desired. Typically, large sums of money are allocated for the maintenance of the imperial family, and the girl does not understand where the budget goes. She looks over the scroll and hands it to Betty, asking her to take it for herself. Lottie thanks the servant and says that she would like to thank the prince personally. The man replies that the prince now has his morning lesson. Lottie asks which one, and is told it is world history. She understands that a teacher is normal for a young prince, but something is alarming, and she asks if she can be present. The servant replies that it is difficult, since the Viscount does not like guests, and Lottie agrees. She asks for some more food and promises to return everything next month. The man says it's no problem, and asks if she's looking for anything specific. Lottie replies that she doesn't know herself and asks Betty to check. Then she pulls the maid closer and whispers to her to stall for time while she figures something out. Betty agrees, and soon Lottie is walking with another maid, promising to see her later. While examining the palace, the girl feels that her intuition is telling her the truth. Akron's burns are connected to these lessons, as she began to sense the spirit's energy. Suddenly, Lottie stops, and the maid asks what happened. The girl says that she needs to go to the restroom, and the maid offers to show her the way. But Lottie suddenly takes off, and the maid shouts after her. The princess opens the door to one of the rooms and sees that everything inside is engulfed in flames. There she sees Akron and the teacher using the power of fire, and the prince looks at her in shock. Akron asks what she's doing here, and Lottie smirks. She says it's clearly not a restroom, adding that she was told it was a history lesson. Coming closer to the man, she asks if he thinks there aren't enough books for the lesson. She asks if he is Viscount Polton, and he confirms. Lottie realizes that everything is exactly as she thought, because there is a sense of spiritual energy here. The Viscount is the guardian of the spirit, and to do this, you need to do more than just see spirits, but also to possess magic, and to be born with both qualities, which is why many swindlers appeared. Previously, it was impossible to strengthen the connection with the spirit, but the deceivers found ways. It was obvious that this was related to Akron's power, since the Viscount was only directing him towards the fire. Akron looked at him in confusion, and the Viscount said that this would strengthen the connection with the spirit. He explained with a smile that this was not an ordinary fire, but a call from the spirit of fire. Akron asked if his father would look at him if he mastered this power and became a guardian. The Viscount assured him that yes, and asked him to believe him. The boy had reached his hand towards the fire, but now he's shouting at Lottie to get out. He asks how dare she come in. Lottie apologizes and says she'll leave, but first, she apologizes to Viscount Polton and says that she was too rude. Lottie extends her hand and asks if he can forgive her. The Viscount smiles and says that of course, although the apology is so-so. He adds that this is probably due to his long stay in prison. The Viscount says he accepts the apology, but at that moment the girl suddenly grabs his hand. Then she squeezes his hand sharply and unleashes her magic. The Viscount experiences excruciating pain and falls to his knees. Looking at the princess, he does not understand how she can possess such power because he himself has made a contract with a mid-level spirit. The girl realizes that a guardian with such a contract is simply not capable of resisting her power. After all, she's connected to the Spirit King. At this point, the boy turns to the Viscount and asks if everything is all right, but glancing at the man, she sees that he's already unconscious. Then the protagonist turns to Akron. She says the bond cannot be strengthened by exposing oneself to the spirit of fire. The young man asks how she knows this and is told it's an old scam. The girl says this man deceived Akron and took advantage of his despair. The boy cries out that this can't be true. After all, he was told that through the spirit of fire, he would be able to contact Celeste, a spirit of the middle level. He says that then he will be recognized, and, unable to contain himself, begins to cry. He shouts that he wants to be recognized. The girl is surprised and comes closer. She hugs him and tells him that confession is not necessary, and that he shouldn't dwell on it. Lottie says he's amazing in his own right and asks if he realizes it. She knows you don't have to follow someone else's path. You can always find your own. A path that will be easier and more joyful. At this moment, drops of red liquid begin to fall to the floor. The main character realizes with horror that blood is flowing from her nose. After this, she loses consciousness. The young man, shocked, calls her name. After a while, Lottie opens her eyes and sees Betty. The maid asks if her mistress is awake. She says how worried she was because Lottie suddenly fell. She didn't regain consciousness for 2 days. The girl, in shock, realized she'd lost consciousness from a minor strain. She notices that the room is too luxurious and unfamiliar to her and asks where they are. The answer is that this is his room. Then, Lottie sees the prince. She asks Betty to step out for a minute, and the maid agrees. Lottie asks Akron if he's okay. He says yes, and she inquires about the Viscount's fate. The prince says he's been fired. Lottie replies that he deserves a public reprimand. She asks if he is going to tell His Majesty about everything. The young man says that then he will look like a fool, and his brother and sister will finally turn away from him. Everyone will only be angry when they find out he was deceived. Lottie watches him cry silently. Then she points to the bed and invites him to sit. The young man obeys. The girl comes closer and says that he is not guilty of anything. People make mistakes, especially children, and it's not his fault. After all, he was simply looking for an answer. The young man says he feels lonely. Lottie replies that everything will be fine because she is there and mentally promises to take care of him. Sometimes, when someone hugs you like this, the young man realizes he's never felt such warmth before. He admits that he was evil and apologizes for mocking the mudblood. Lottie says he's still a baby and it's no big deal. Then he asks, "What is she talking about? He's already 10 years old?" The girl is surprised and asks again. The young man gets angry and tells her to stay here until she gets stronger. He leaves the room, and Lottie thinks he looks much younger. She wonders if it's just a matter of appearance. At that moment, someone knocks on the door, and she allows entry. It's the same servant with the history lessons. Lottie asks why he lied. The man apologizes and says he'll accept any punishment. The girl replies she'll ask the question differently. She asks why he didn't tell the king, since Akron had crossed the line. But this had to be reported. The servant speaks the truth. He asked for an audience with the king many times, but was refused each time. Lottie asks why he didn't contact the queen or her maid. She was traveling, and the maid had fallen into eternal sleep. The girl understands how bad everything is in this family and says that nothing can be done. She declares that she will tell the king everything herself and will not allow Akron to be punished. The servant looks at her in surprise, then bows and thanks her. Lottie asks him to raise his head, and he does so. After a while, she turns to the maid and notices her agitation, asking what happened. She says that someone has come to see the lady. Lottie is surprised, but allows the guest to enter. Someone greets Her Highness, and the girl tries to figure out who it is. The man announces that Her Majesty wishes to see the princess. Lottie thinks she's not even getting a break. Soon, they arrive at the palace. She is told that the queen is walking in the garden, and the girl asks whether she should go there. The butler replies that she needs to visit several places first. Lottie wonders where and soon finds herself in the bathroom. She's confused about what's going on and why they're treating her like this. One maid. He asks if the water is warm, and another one promises to bring a drink. Lottie is then dressed and asked what kind of jewelry she likes. She understands that by selling just one thing, she could avoid starving for months. But she wonders what all this is for, and whether it is a gift. The maid says it is Her Majesty's order and an apology to Princess Lottie. The girl thinks that these maids are also victims and remembers words about those who testified against her. Lottie stands up and says that she will make a decision after meeting with Her Majesty. Soon she comes out into the garden. The queen discusses the rebellions and orders a pay raise. The maid announces that Princess Lottie has arrived. The servant bows and leaves, leaving the women alone. The queen calls Lottie to her. The girl looks at her, and he recalls the story of the king's ascension to the throne. She gave up the throne for his power, and Lottie wonders if he cares about her. The queen says we can sit down. Lottie feels a gaze and realizes it is the maid, waiting for the situation to repeat itself. She appeals to Her Majesty with a request for forgiveness, and she asks to try the tea first, otherwise she won't be able to withstand that look. The former queen laughs and says that the maid has always been like this since childhood. Lottie replies that she is still sure that she can distinguish between personal and professional matters. The woman agrees and the maid apologizes. She says they had no proof, but their suspicions remained. The Empress drinks tea, and Lottie, after a pause, says that she forgives them. She adds that they should continue to serve diligently. The maid promises to follow her advice. The Empress remarks that forgiveness came too easily. Lottie says that strong anger would only interrupt the conversation. She remembers that she is a child, and children are impulsive. She adds that she shouldn't play with fire, and asks if she needs anything else. The woman says that the girl refused the gift and asks what she wants. Lottie understands the meaning of the refusal and says that she just wants to have tea together. She knows that a connection needs to be created between them. The Empress says she is free, but wants to know the reason. Lottie asks if it really matters and answers. She wants to get closer to her grandmother. The woman laughs and says it's unexpected. The girl was different before, and Lottie says she almost fell into an eternal sleep in prison. She passed the test and asks if this is the reason for the change. The Empress recalls the girl screaming in an ancient language during her escape. Lottie remembers the conversation with the gods and understands what it is about. Lunda was her native language, the language of the first life, which became ancient after rebirth. Lottie explains how it all happened. The Empress asks what it was, but she says she's busy, and instead of tea, she hands over a bracelet. She says she will see what the girl is really capable of. Lottie smiles sincerely and thanks the Empress, then becomes lost in thought. She says she came for more than that, and asks about Her Majesty's health. The woman replies that she is already feeling better. The young lady apologizes and asks if she can check on her condition. The woman agrees and Lottie takes her hand, saying that it will only take a little time. The girl asks if the Empress has a chronic illness, as she was seriously injured earlier. The woman is surprised that it's noticeable and confirms that she was poisoned. Lottie understands that because of this poison, the Empress has still not recovered and miraculously survived, although she still often loses consciousness. The young lady asks if she knows about mandrake. The woman replies that she does, because it's an ingredient for magicians. Lottie explains that mandrake can be a medicine if drunk in a strong decoction, as it restores lost energy, especially the roots from the south of the continent. She asks for some of this remedy. The woman agrees and wonders where the girl got such knowledge. Lottie replies that she's simply been reading a lot. After a while, she's already looking at the root remedy she's prepared. She understands that obtaining and preparing mandrake was difficult, but drinking it was even more difficult. Nevertheless, the girl makes up her mind and drinks the decoction. She starts coughing and says it's disgusting, and the maid asks if she really needs to continue. Lottie replies that it is necessary, because yesterday after this, she was able to hold out for 10 minutes without any problems. Betty asks about the list on the table, and Lottie explains that it is the people assigned to the palace and the maid's colleagues. Betty is surprised by the number of names and asks if they all belong to the palace. Lottie asks if Betty's wages are paid in her name. The maid confirms that she receives everything from Her Highness. Then, Lottie realizes that the biggest expenses were for staff and medication, even though there is no one else but Betty, and she is not receiving any medication. She believes that because of her poor health, she was easily deceived by inflated prices for medications. The next big expense is bushes and flowers, but the yard looks neglected. The girl understands that from the very beginning they brought the cheapest ones and simply planted them. So a lot of money was stolen, and Lottie asks who Leal Dean is. Betty replies that it is the Baron, a good man who often came and checked the mansion. He even helped her, and Lottie begins to suspect that it was he who stole her money. She says that everything is clear and asks Betty to help her. After a while, someone calls out to the Baron and asks why he is running away again. The man is surprised and asks what all this talk is about, but the other just waves his hand. He reminds that the Baron has owed him money for a long time. The blonde asks him to calm down and says that he will soon repay the debt, since he has been a regular at the gambling house for 10 years. He hints that he knows who he can take money from. This mudblood. Another man says he's heard disturbing rumors about her. Previously, spending was allowed to go unpunished because the imperial family did not pay attention. The Baron assures that these are just rumors, and one can only hope. He recalls the maid's words about Her Majesty and Miss Lottie having tea together. This angers him, and he says that the mudblood has attracted the attention of the Empress. He decides that he must fix this by remembering what she was like before. A stupid and insecure girl with broken self-esteem. He believed that her mother was the same, and that it was better for them to stay away from the imperial family. After all, the baby is supposedly incapable and can only trust him. This went on for 10 years. He thinks that he cannot lose his position and tries to reassure himself. A little later, he comes to the young lady's mansion. Lottie greets him, and the Baron smiles and says that he hasn't seen Her Highness for a long time. He introduces himself again and gives his name as Leal Dean. He says he's responsible for Her Highness's palace. Lottie looks at its decoration. She finds it strange, but introduces herself as Lottie Pandarion. She asks if she can call herself that, and the man agrees. He thinks that even memory loss does not change a person. The Baron says he heard about the unpleasant incident and was looking for her. He justifies himself by saying that he was delayed because of his grandmother's death, although in fact she died 3 years ago. Lottie says it's okay, and if only she knew. She would be more worried and apologizes. The Baron is pleased. He thinks the girl has become more obedient, but Lottie gets down to business. She asks why the palace is so poorly managed, and refers to the maid's words. She said that the money was not coming every month, and the Baron was in a panic. He says that everything was done for Her Highness and asks if the summer is for her. The Baron claims that most of the funds went towards medications and landscaping. He hands over an expense report and offers to take a look. He's sure he's gone a little overboard, but Lottie won't notice. The girl looks at the report and says that it is her own fault, apologizing to the Baron. The man thinks how naive she is, because it is clear that she will have to starve. Then his gaze falls on the chest of drawers containing Her Majesty's ornaments. He recognizes the bracelet that the Empress has been wearing since her youth. He understands that they not only drink tea together, but also exchange gifts. Then he decides that the proximity can be used to obtain political information. He says that he heard about her rapprochement with the Empress. Lottie replies that after losing her memory, she takes care of her and gave her this jewelry. She says that the Empress talked about politics and history, although she did not understand much of it. The Baron grins and calls it a real stroke of luck. He asks what exactly they talked about and asks them to tell him. He reminds her that she used to share everything with him, and that for 10 years he never once revealed her secrets. He asks to share at least a little. Lottie says it should stay between them. She reports that duties on tobacco leaves containing benthic acid will soon be significantly increased. The Baron understands the value of information because tobacco is very popular among the nobility. Increasing duties will drive up prices, and you need to buy everything in advance. Then he remembers the rumors from the gambling house in Port Dawn. He stands up abruptly, and Lottie asks what happened. The Baron says that he remembered an urgent matter and leaves. He runs out of the room, and Lottie grins and says goodbye. After some time, Lottie again drinks the disgusting root decoction. The maid approaches her, and Lottie asks to speak. Betty wonders how the lady knew she had a question. Lottie says Betty always comes like that when she wants to say something. Betty denies this and asks if she couldn't just tell the king about the theft. Lottie replies that then the money will go back to the treasury and she will get nothing. So they will do everything in one go. She will receive money, medicine, and His Majesty's trust. Lottie gets up and says that it's time for them to go. Betty is surprised, and Lottie says that they are going to the king. At this time, the king is sitting in his office and thinking about the lady with silver hair. The more he thinks, the more his head hurts, and he remembers their closeness and kisses, and then her sudden escape. No matter how much he begged, she left, and soon. They presented the child to him and told him that she was his daughter and that her mother could not raise her. Since then, the headache has not subsided, especially after the meeting. Then one aristocrat tried to persuade them not to make the girl a princess. Another said he couldn't leave his sister. The king replied that Lottie was his daughter. The girl grew weak, and he secretly sent her medicine and food. He hoped that she would get stronger and recover one day. He hoped so much that she wouldn't disappear that all his thoughts were only of her. And finally, the war, which had dragged on for many years, ended. The king gradually dealt with the remaining problems, but suddenly they tried to put the former queen into eternal sleep with poison. He looked for evidence of her innocence, but the girl herself managed to clear her name. Now the man just smiles, but when they call out to him, he replies that he was just thinking. He then asks about the search for the smugglers. The servant says things are going badly, especially with the gambling house. At this moment, a young lady appears and slightly lifts the hem of her dress. She greets His Majesty. The king looks at her coldly and asks what happened. The girl says that she has a request, asks for forgiveness, and says that she will express herself differently. She offers a deal and promises to help catch the smugglers. In exchange, he must fulfill one of her wishes. The king is surprised, while the Baron is off the coast. One of the men asks if he's sure the information is accurate. The Baron answers in the affirmative. He asks if he thinks the queen gave the bracelet to the mudblood just like that. He also mentions rumors of an imminent increase in duties on tobacco leaves. The second man decides to believe it. He understands that he is risking his entire fortune, but the blonde asks him not to worry. He promises that with the profit they will live like noblemen, and the interlocutor agrees. Suddenly, someone approaches them and greets them. Both men are stunned. The young lady says with a grin that she is glad to meet the Baron and asks how long it took him to reach his goal. The Baron, shocked, asks where she came from, and the blonde realizes that he was deceived. The girl says it was all a lie. The Baron becomes angry and realizes the bracelet and tobacco were a trap. He says it was stupid for her to come alone, because she could have brought soldiers. He points his hand, ordering his men to come forward. At that moment, assassins appear from behind, and the Baron says that they still have a chance to escape. He declares that they will act as a shield between him and the young lady. She watches silently and smirks, saying it was foolish to bring so few people. She says that she didn't come alone, but that she had a whole squad with her, and adds that the bracelet was real. The assassins are indignant, saying this was not agreed upon. At this point, Leoldine and Betten Lurton are approached again. The man realizes in horror that it is the king. The young lady's father announces their sentence for conspiring with smugglers. The men fall and scream, but are quickly plunged into eternal sleep. Later, the knight says that this is an excellent job, because the smugglers were caught and the distribution points were destroyed. He adds that the mercenaries were also a problem, and they were dealt with successfully. The king turns to the young lady. He says he has questions and asks how she understood everything. She replies that smugglers do not sell goods directly. A gambling house is the best place to sell illegal goods. So the connection between gambling and smuggling seemed obvious to her. The knight says the investigation was going in the same direction, but too cautiously. The girl realizes it's noticeable, because she's been bullied for 10 years. The king asks again, how did she know the smuggled tobacco leaves would be? She says it's simple. This is the most expensive imported product, which is imported in small quantities. She just didn't expect the contraband to take up an entire ship. The king falls silent for a moment. He then orders the knight to give the princess what he promised, and he agrees. He says that for each smuggler there is 1,000 gold pieces and 20% of the confiscated goods. Lottie thinks it's wonderful, but she knows the story isn't over yet. The knight reports that a family heirloom was found in Barondine's house. He says they're seeds, Lottie confirms. She remembers the starflower brooch she noticed when they met. This flower no longer grows in accessible places, and the Baron did not know its true value. That is why the flower was on the coat of arms and the seeds were kept as a relic. Lottie realizes that an ordinary person cannot grow a star flower, but she is confident of her success. The emperor turns to the princess. He says that he is ready to listen to her wishes and fulfill any request. Lottie asks him to talk to Akron. The king is surprised. He says he already receives daily reports on his condition. The girl replies that she means a personal conversation and asks when he last saw him. The king says he often asked about business. Lottie asks if the answers were the same. He remembers how Akron always said that everything was fine and he was trying his best, and that he cannot disappoint the king. At that moment, the man understands how far he's distanced himself from his children. Lottie realizes this along with him. She wonders how one can believe that a 10-year-old child always feels the same way. After all, children live with emotions and can talk for hours about the sky, birds, and stars. When a child repeats the same thing, he desperately seeks approval. So Lottie asks the king to talk to Akron. Talk to him about today and your difficulties, looking into his eyes. She says that this is exactly what she wants and asks for one thing, so that the king wouldn't scold Akron even if he made a mistake. The king asks about her. He asks if she has any wishes for herself. Lottie is surprised. She thinks, and the king asks her to tell the truth. The girl replies that she doesn't want anything, comes up to them, and says that it's time for them to go. She leaves, leaving the king alone, and he wonders why she didn't ask for anything. The next day, Betty reports that the food warehouse is full. Lottie asks if it's been fixed. Betty replies that it was done quickly, and rumors are already circulating around the palace about yesterday's arrest. Lottie looks out the window and sees gifts from the king. She understands that they are too luxurious and clearly more expensive than promised. She is grateful, but knows that she cannot stand out without a reason. She is illegitimate and has 2 claimants to the throne. If they pay attention to her, problems are inevitable, and the queen is now actively traveling around the provinces after the end of the war. She is involved not only in the palace, but also in foreign affairs, which means she also strives for power. If Lottie becomes a nuisance, it's dangerous, so she decides to act quietly and talk about the new workers. Betty asks if this means replacing Baron Dean. Lottie replies no, she can't hire people based on recommendations so as not to repeat the past mistake. Lottie hands Betty the keys to the warehouse and the safe. She asks if she can take care of it, since she trusts her more than anyone else. Betty is surprised and thanks for the trust. Then she says she can't. Lottie is stunned. She didn't expect a refusal and asks what the reason is. Betty admits that she can't read. Lottie looks at her in surprise. Betty says her mother was a servant to the aristocracy, and it was thanks to her former mistress that she got into the palace. Lottie looks at her with sadness. She then says that it can be learned and promises to teach her to write. She says that if you want, she will even teach you an ancient language. Betty is surprised because only aristocrats are taught this. Lottie pulls her cheeks and tells her to remember. There is no knowledge available only to one class. Knowledge is like water. If access is blocked, it stagnates and begins to rot. This was the case with herbalism, when the level of knowledge was only declining. So Lottie encourages Betty to do her best. Thus begins the teaching of writing, and soon, due to rumors, other servants come. The lessons are going well, but by the evening Lottie feels very tired. She understands that if attitudes towards education change, more people will study. But then she thinks that she alone won't change anything. At this moment, someone runs into the room and screams loudly. The boy tries to say a word, starting with the letter T, but cannot continue. The main character asks if he really needs the restroom, but the young man immediately cries out that this is not the case at all. He says His Majesty has requested a meeting. The little girl thinks he's finally made up his mind. Apparently, it took longer to finish the business with the smugglers in the gambling house. The guy asks why he was called, and whether it has anything to do with Viscount Polton. He thinks that he might be punished, but the young lady replies that she doesn't think so. She says the king just wants to talk, and if Akron has something to say, let him say it. Akron is surprised and asks if this is possible, and the young lady confidently answers that it is. The young man perks up and says that he really does have a lot of topics, including the horse he recently raised. He asks if she knows what he called her, because her name was Alexander Alfredo Sebastian Zonda III. He adds that he got 100 points in philosophy, and the teacher called him a genius. The little girl agrees and says that he really is a genius, but notices that he is too formal with her. She asks to be called Nuna, or just Lottie, and to be just a little polite in public. The young man is embarrassed and says that he will try. The young lady understands that such treatment is still too unusual for him. Akron awkwardly mispronounces Nuna, and the young lady immediately repeats it, laughing. The young man blushes so much that he looks like a tomato. He cries out that he's mistaken, pronounces Nuna correctly, and asks if she can hear him. Lottie replies that it was cuter with the mistake. The young man gets angry and rises from his seat. He leaves, saying it's time for him to go. The young lady realizes the day has been eventful and enjoyable. The next day, she finds herself at a tea party and feels very awkward. After all, she drinks tea with the king. Earlier, a servant came to her with a message. He said it was an invitation from His Majesty, and the young lady was surprised. The servant said that the sunny day was perfect for tea, but she did not understand why the king was calling her. In the end, she decided that there was no reason to refuse and agreed. Soon they headed towards the palace, and the butler suddenly asked if it was Countess Selah. Lottie looked over, and the servant said he understood the situation, but he couldn't help. The woman tried to say something. The young lady asks the butler if they know each other, and he replies that yes, she has served in the palace since childhood. Lottie realizes that many of the maids marry when they come of age, and he realizes that Mrs. Selah is one of them. The butler adds that she's here on business. He also mentions that several years ago, Count Selah fell into eternal sleep after a long illness. The man apologizes for being talkative, but Lottie says it's no problem. The butler adds that Leanna is taking this hard. Lottie makes a mental note of the name. She recalls Betty's words about how they wanted to put Madame Leanna in place of Barandine. Lottie asks if Miss Selah helped Betty. The butler confirms and says that she often helped. He adds that Miss Selah managed the servants and was trained by him. Lottie realizes she's found the perfect new maid. Soon, she's having tea with the king. She looks at the table and sees that all the dishes are too sweet. The king asks if she doesn't like it. Lottie says she likes it, but wonders if there's anything less sweet. The king says he prepared this because children like sweets. Lottie thinks it's a test, especially with a fork and knife. The king offers to order another one to be prepared, but she refuses. She decides to eat it, accepting his efforts and forgiving such a mistake. The king promises that next time he will prepare something to her taste. Lottie is surprised by the words about next time. She puts down her fork and says she wants to ask a question. She asks why he invited her. The king replies that communication is important. Lottie clarifies that she meant Akrina, not herself. The king says that she is also his child. The young lady falls silent. He admits that he was indifferent to her and did not pay attention to her. He apologizes and asks for forgiveness. Lottie understands that this is important to her. She honestly says that she doesn't know what to answer and feels awkward. The king replies that he did not expect immediate forgiveness. He asks to give him a chance and says that he will wait as long as necessary. Lottie replies that she'll think about it. She understands that parental indifference is common, just like cruelty, but sometimes parents really do try to change. She remembers her past life and her mother's promises. But then, nothing changed, and the apologies were just an attempt to regain control. That's why she now decides to give the king a chance, because no one has ever apologized to her before. She remembers the look in his eyes when he asked for a chance. Lottie knows it's time to go back and pushes her thoughts away, feeling like she's forgotten something. Suddenly, she remembers Miss Selah and sighs, thinking that she has been refused. At that moment, she is called out to, and turning around, she sees the princess. Lottie asks her to wait as she wants to talk. The woman is surprised to recognize the princess and asks if everything is okay. Lottie feels a familiar warmth from the touch and asks if she knows her. The woman introduces herself and says that she often brought her food when she was little. Lottie understands and says that perhaps it shouldn't be made a big deal, but wants to clarify. She says she lost her memory due to illness. The woman is shocked. She puts her hands on Lottie's shoulders and asks if she's in any pain right now. Lottie notes a calm tone, a habit of caring, and an overreaction to pain. She says she's fine and it was just an accident. The woman replies that memory loss is a serious thing and one needs to be careful. She apologizes, realizing that she said too much. Then she says it's time for her to go to the baby. Lottie notices fatigue and signs of sleeplessness, and he understands that the memory may have been erased, but Miss Selah's imprint remains. Lottie asks how sick the child is. The woman is surprised and asks how she knows. Lottie understands this by the smell of medicinal herbs and the reaction to pain. But the decisive factor was her eyes, full of self-loathing. She says that caring is exhausting. It is very difficult to be next to a seriously ill person and not be able to help. You have to move forward, even when your strength is gone and your smile disappears. Feeling guilty about powerlessness is a terrible ordeal. The woman starts to cry, and Lottie takes her hands and tells her she did a great job. She says she deserves credit for the journey she's taken. The woman asks a question. She asks if she is a terrible mother. Lottie replies that she doesn't think so, and that she did her best. She watches the woman cry, and after a while asks about the child's illness. The woman replies that it is Roman fever, which came from another continent. There it was light, but here it became deadly, covering the body with spots and leading to immersion into eternal sleep. The illness would retreat, and then return, slowly draining away my strength. They sit down on a bench, and the woman says that the medication only helped for a short time. Having no funds, she fired her servants, sold her valuables, and even her mansion. She sold her engagement ring, but there was still not enough money. She tried to work as a governess, but was turned down for fear of infection. The story brought her relief. Lottie asks if she can see the baby, and the woman doesn't understand why. Lottie says she is studying herbalism and has learned a lot from her teacher. The woman thanks him, but says that even the best doctor couldn't help. He said that, unfortunately, even Mrs. Carbone could not cure him. Carbone is a goddess of herbalism who lived hundreds of years ago. It is said that if she is mentioned near a sick person, they will surely fall into eternal sleep. The main character is surprised and wonders if this is really about her and her past life. After some time, the woman confidently says that this is incredible, and with trembling hands approaches her son. She notices that her son's face has become fresher. The boy on the bed is named Raven Selah. The young lady says that when the water boils, you should let it cool and then wipe your body twice a day. The fever should disappear within a week. The woman says she is immensely grateful to the lady and doesn't know how to repay her kindness. She still asks Her Highness what kind of medicine she has prepared because she has tried all the herbs and this is the first time she has seen such an effective decoction. The main character thinks that this is not surprising because the decoction is made from a starflower, which she grew with special care. Every day, she left the seeds in the starlight and the undines watered them with their water, and thanks to this, the flowers sprouted. She had no other choice because conventional treatment was not helping, and the child's condition had become critical. Now the young lady is a little sad, but decides that it is not scary, because she still has seeds. The woman, noticing this, asks if everything is okay, and the main character says that everything is fine and asks not to worry. The girl adds that the Countess said she didn't know how to repay her. The woman confirms, and says that if Her Highness wants something, she should just say so. The main character takes her hand and asks if she would like to become her maid. The woman looks puzzled, and the main character wonders if she will be rejected again. The maid thanks her for saving her son, but says she cannot become Her Highness's maid. Lottie asks why, and the woman admits she feels awkward. She explains that Raven's great-grandfather, Viscount Byron, is trying to take him away. The main character asks if he really wants to take the child away, and the woman replies that he does. He wants to become the boy's guardian and hopes to put him into eternal sleep in order to receive the title. Despite her refusals, the man pressures her, using Raven's illness. He even talked about marriage. The main character says she heard everything, but she still finds it difficult to understand. If she becomes a maid, at least she'll earn some money. The woman agrees that's true. But the maid's salary is small, and the young lady decides that she will raise it tenfold. However, the woman says the child needs a guardian, even if it is not Viscount Byron, so she is going to ask for a distant relative. If she becomes a maid, she and Raven will be separated. She can't allow this to happen because her husband has fallen into eternal sleep, and she only has Raven left. So she declines Her Highness's offer and apologizes. The protagonist turns to Countess Lyanna Sale and says she has a question. The girl asks if the woman would agree to become a maid if the issues of salary, custody, and training for Raven were resolved. The woman is surprised, then smiles and says she would agree. And she adds that she would be very happy. The main character replies that it would be wonderful and asks him to follow her. The woman is surprised and asks where they are going. The girl says they're going to solve problems. A little while later, they're already standing before the king. The young lady declares that she wishes to make Countess Selah her maid. The man says she has no reason to come to him to hire a servant, and asks if there is a problem. The young lady replies that there is a problem, and that the Countess needs to become the guardian of her son, Raven Sale. The woman is as surprised as His Majesty. She says she wants another one. She wants Countess Selah and her son to live in her palace. The man tells the princess that, unfortunately, she's too young to be a guardian. The girl wonders if she could become one if the king gives her blessing. The man wants to say something, but the young lady asks if this is too much. She understands that the use of power is what sets her apart from others. The man sighs, then turns to the Countess and asks her opinion. He asks if she agrees to let the second princess, Lottie Pandarian, become Raven Sale's guardian. The woman doesn't know what to answer, and the young lady whispers that the salary will be 10 times more. The Countess recalls the young lady's words about how far she had come and how she deserved praise. She remembers that the princess called her a wonderful mother who did everything possible, and smiles. She says it's an honor for her. A short time later, the woman enters the mansion. She is greeted, introduces herself as Lyanna Sale, and says that from today on she is Her Highness's maid. Thanks to the princess's grace, she will remain in the palace with her son. The boy peers out from behind her. He asks to take care of him and says that his name is Raven Sale. The maids greet Mistress Lyanna and ask her to take care of them. Thus, Lyanna became the protagonist's maid. Now the young lady is lying on the bed and thinks that she can finally rest. I just want to lie in a warm bed. At that moment, someone knocks and says it's the maid, Selah, asking if they can come in. The young lady gives her permission. The woman enters and says that she wants to thank the lady again for her help. The young man says he'll definitely repay the princess's favor, and she can rest easy. The main character thinks how cute he is. She thanks him and asks him to take care of her. The woman tells the princess that she has noticed several things that need to be corrected. First, she needs to buy a new dress. Betty confirms that the lady only has 4 dresses from last year. The young lady thinks shopping is unavoidable. Lyanna says etiquette dictates at least 3 outfits per season. Also a walking dress, home clothes, and a dress for going out. The woman asks if the mistress would mind if she took care of it. The girl agrees, and Liana says she knows an excellent tailor. The young lady realizes Liana understands fashion better than she thought. Liana says it's natural, because working in a palace, it's impossible not to understand fashion, and she used to visit the atelier often. So don't worry about the prayer celebration. Everything will be ready. Betty says the celebration is coming soon. The young lady asks what kind of celebration it is, and the girl replies that it is a prayerful one. It is an important national event at the end of spring when people pray for well-being and health. They pray for one day, but the festival itself lasts 3 days. Betty says the opening of the prayer, it takes place at the Daetome Temple, which is located near the palace. However, the young lady says she won't go. She thinks the gods are angry. After all, she refused to make nectar, so how could she appear in the temple? Although Daetome is a kind goddess, it's best not to attract her attention. The maids say that's not right, and they should go. One of them says that this is a national event, and members of the royal family cannot remain on the sidelines. The entire royal family is required to attend. The main character wonders if the whole family will be there. Betty turns to Her Highness. She asks if the princess doesn't want to see everyone, since Her Majesty the Queen. Prince Leonard and Princess Stella will be there too. Liana says it's wonderful. Betty agrees, but the main character thinks that everything is not so rosy. She worries that she might faint and wonders when she will be able to rest. Sometime later, the main character is riding in a carriage and thinks that if she jumps out, she won't have to go to the party. She also wonders what will happen if Daetome shows up and asks why she doesn't make nectar, and will the king and queen begin to care for her more, but then the queen. The prince and princess would watch over her, and sooner or later she would have to meet the gods. So Daetome is the lesser evil for her, but she still doesn't want to go to the party, and the time is also inappropriate. Because of her affairs, the entire aristocracy is keeping an eye on her. At this point, someone turns to the young lady and asks if everything is all right. It's the prince, he asks, if she's hot and should open the window. The girl says that everything is fine, and asks why he is going to the Daetome Temple with her. She understands that the royal family usually travels separately to official events for security reasons. The young man says this is her first official event. He's afraid that if she acts stupidly, she'll bring shame on the family. The young lady says he just wanted to go with her, and the young man sheepishly objects. She asks if it's because he's still young, and if she should hold his hand, and if he wants to hold hers. The young man cries out in embarrassment. The main character looks at him and thinks how upset he is. The young lady asks if he knows. But the boy says he's not interested. She continues anyway, saying that she wanted to go with him. She'd be nervous going alone, since it's her first time, so she thanks him. The young man says that this time he forgives her, and the main character strokes his head. She thinks how cute he is. The young man asks his sister if she wants to know anything about others, like the queen or the prince. The main character thinks he's gone to help her. She understands that questions can turn into problems and punishment, but she has no one to tell. The young man says he can tell the story himself. The main character asks if it's true and calls him the best. The boy begins his story and says that the queen's name is Clea Pandarion. She is very beautiful and was the Marchioness of Floyd before her marriage. The main character is surprised by the last name and remembers the man from the incident with the poisoning of the queen. This means that he is from her family, and the young lady is an illegitimate child. The girl realizes that Prince Leonard is 10 years her senior and possesses powerful magical talent. He is already a 5th circle wizard. She also understands that most people stop at the 2nd or 3rd level, and reaching the 5th level at 20 is incredibly difficult. The guy is a true genius. Akron says he treats him kindly, but they rarely see each other. He spends most of his time in the magic tower. Princess Stella is 9 years older than the young lady. She wields a spear with skill, has already become a knight and fought monsters. She fought in the war, and the girl understands that the king is a master swordsman. The eldest son is a wizard, the eldest daughter is a knight, so Akron is noticeably losing heart. The main character asks the boy if he practices fencing, and he replies that he does. He's given it a lot of thought and decided that fencing is the best fit for him, but he's still nervous. The main character asks why. The young man replies that they usually start much earlier, and it seems to him that it is already too late. The main character understands that usually education really does begin no later than 5 years old. Now she says the time is not lost. You can start little by little, and it doesn't matter exactly when. The main thing is to see it through to the end. The young man agrees, smiles, and soon they arrive at the palace. The young man turns to his sister and tells her that there's a tree growing nearby that Daetome herself planted. He asks if she'd like to see it later. The heroine agrees. A knight approaches her and informs her that everyone has already arrived and is in their rooms. The young lady is surprised that everyone is ready, and the knight says that there is little time left before the great celebration and that they should hurry. They continue on. The young lady asks the knight if the matter with the unknown gambling house has been resolved. The man answers in the affirmative. He reports that all the smugglers have been caught, and the gambling house is closed. The young lady says that's understandable, and the knight adds that there's one person left who hasn't been found yet. He always wore a mask in the gambling house. The young lady realized the problem was that the establishment was for the aristocracy. The man says the testimony is confusing, and it's difficult to even determine the person's gender. All the stories agree on one thing: the mask. The main character wonders if illusion magic is at play. The man says they even contacted the royal wizard from the mage tower. The young lady hopes they'll find an answer quickly. The man says he has other business and will leave the girl for now. Then another priest approaches her. He says he'll accompany her from now on. The protagonist walks on, but suddenly hears someone's voice. The voice asks where she is going and says that he knows she can hear him. The girl calls him by his first and last name, then corrects herself and addresses him as a traveler to the Palace of Nectar. The main character stops. The priest asks the princess if something happened. The young lady wonders if others can hear the voice and where it's coming from. Then the voice asks her to look below. The girl does so and can't believe her eyes. There's something lying at her foot. The main character sees a plant branch. It's the goddess of fertility. The goddess says she's glad Lottie is here. She lay on the ground for a long time. She already thought she would fall into eternal sleep. Lottie recalls that she wanted to rest and left the holy relic behind. The girl understands that usually gods inhabit relics to communicate with priests. The fertility goddess says she doesn't know why she's still here. The protagonist wonders what she means. The woman explains that she tried to possess the relic to bestow a blessing but was repelled. The young lady asks why the goddess doesn't return to the divine world and refuse to appear. The goddess replies that she cannot, otherwise the other gods will mock her for many thousands of years. As soon as she thinks about Kairos, his image immediately pops into her head. The protagonist realizes that she doesn't like him either. This boy always demanded more nectar. The goddess begs the young lady to help her return to the realm of the gods and promises to repay her with anything. Lottie agrees. She understands that even a powerful god can be dangerous if he remains in the human world for too long. The young lady asks him to remember his gratitude and his protection. The girl hides the twig in her clothes. Akron asks what happened. Lottie replies that everything is fine, and she simply picked up the stalk of grass from the ground. The young man says that they can go further, but one of the priests cries out that something bad has happened. Another asks what happened, as the day is quiet and reverent. The young man says he's sorry, but it concerns Father Antine. The main character sighs and realizes that she is sure that it is all because of Detome. She says that something serious is about to happen, so they need to hurry. After some time, an announcement is made about the arrival of Her Highness Princess Lottie and Prince Akarin. The main character realizes that she tried so hard to avoid these people, but Queen Clea is here. Also Princess Stella and Prince Leonard. The queen greets Akarin and Princess Lottie. The main character bows. The woman looks at her a little coldly, but still smiles. She says she heard about the trouble in her absence, and she regrets that she couldn't be there. The young lady tells the queen that everything is fine. Akarin asks Her Majesty if something has happened. His sister says there seems to be a problem with the holy relic. The young man is surprised. The main character asks if it is possible to find out what happened to the relic. The princess wonders what the girl can do at all, but then someone closes the book and asks Stella to stop. It turns out to be the prince. He says that everyone knows the gods grant blessings only through a relic. The young lady confirms that she was told about this, although she did not see it herself. The man explains that Detome is the goddess of abundance and was unable to enter the relic. To find out the reason, His Majesty the King, the former queen, and the high priest gathered in the room. The protagonist wonders if the relic is there. The goddess addresses the young lady. She asks them to hurry. Lottie realizes the goddess is acting like a child, even though she is the sister of the chief god. However, the goddess says she feels much younger. The protagonist silently admits she doesn't know what to say. The girl asks if she can examine the relic in person. Everyone is silent. The queen and her daughter look at the girl coldly. Someone says they understand her desire to help, but they're talking about the relic. Then the words are heard that the girl can come in. Everyone is surprised. The man who entered the room says that Lottie is well versed in herbs and holy water, and therefore can be useful. The young man is surprised and asks if she really knows much about herbs and holy water. The woman turns to the young lady, asks if this is true, approaches her and says that she is glad to meet her. The main character realizes that they are not that close and wonders why the woman treats her so warmly. The woman notices another detail and asks where the girl put the bracelet. She recalls asking him to wear it at all times. The rest of the family watches in amazement. The former queen straightens a lock of the young lady's hair and tells her to always wear the bracelet as a talisman. She wants him to protect the baby the same way he once protected her. The girl is shocked and wonders why the former queen is treating her this way. The others watch this as well, and the former queen turns to Lottie. She asks if she'll come in with her for a bit. The girl nods and reminds herself not to forget why she's here. Afterwards, they go outside. The protagonist asks if the queen is intentionally so friendly with her and cold to others. The woman replies yes. The young lady is surprised, and the former queen says she gave the bracelet for a reason. She gave it to him in exchange for something. After a while, the girl asks if the woman wants her to keep Prince Leonard and Princess Stella under her control. The main character asks how to do this and is worried that if she interferes, she will be stabbed in the back. The queen asks if the girl really thinks so and says that she believes the girl can change the royal family and expects this from her. After a little while, the girl enters where the priest is standing, and the king, seeing her, he asks why she came. The former queen replies that she brought a young lady. Lottie is an excellent herbalist, so her help will be useful. The king looks at his mother with a slightly worried expression. The main character looks at the branch. The man says that yes, the sacred relic of the temple of the goddess Datome is this branch. The king turns to the high priest and says the celebration will take place regardless. The man replies that he understands, but it's unknown whether the goddess Datome was able to enter the relic. The young lady's hair bow stirs and complains. He wants to go back and says that if he tries now, he'll succeed. The main character disagrees and asks to wait. If there's something wrong with the relic, this could harm the kingdom's nature, so we need to sort this out first. A young lady asks if she can see the holy relic. The man allows it, but asks her to be very careful. The girl takes the branch in her hands, examines it carefully, but sees no obvious problems. The goddess is perplexed, and the young lady says that she really does not see any damage and feels divine power. Everything looks fine, the branch is fresh, as if it was just cut. The main character wonders why she is like this, and asks the goddess if she remembers when the branch became a relic. The goddess replies that it was a very long time ago, more than 1,000 years ago. The main character breaks a branch. The priest screams in horror and asks what the princess is doing. The king is perplexed. The priest asks how the young lady could do such a thing to a precious relic. The protagonist replies that it's the opposite. This branch is a fake. A genuine relic cannot be broken so easily. Everything created by the gods is imbued with powerful divine power. The main character understands that even a simple branch is not easy for her to break. The priest asks if this is possible, then falls to the floor in shock. The king approaches him and asks if he's been looking after the relics. The high priest exclaims that there were no problems at the previous celebration. He says that he saw it himself. The relic contained divine power. Lottie confirms that divine power does indeed emanate from her, and that everything was fine until last year. The girl asks how the relic is usually protected. The man replies that it is hidden in a secret place under several seals, and only he knows its location. The main character asks if the relic is truly safe there. The man assures her that it is. The young lady says the relic was switched at the end of last year's celebration. It was done by someone capable of terrible deeds who managed to deceive the king and the high priest. The girl steps on a branch, it crumbles, and there is a stone inside. The priest cries out in shock, wondering if there really was a piece of the real relic hidden in the fake. The goddess is furiously indignant and asks who dared to insult her. The priests are horrified to see that the temple is shaking and shout that it is a real earthquake. Someone says that the goddess Datome is furious, and the main character asks her to calm down. She tells me to stop right now, otherwise I'll end up falling into eternal sleep. The goddess stops and apologizes. The main character notes that if the celebration is cancelled, people will be disappointed, and rumors will spread that Datome has left Pandarion. So a new relic needs to be created. The king is surprised and asks if the girl knows how to do this. The young lady says that they have something that Datome herself gave them. She remembers the boy's words about the tree that the goddess planted. The young lady asks if the stolen relic is part of this tree. The priest confirms that she is right. According to the records, the goddess gave a fruit tree to feed the people and then broke off a branch and made a shrine out of it. The goddess confirms that this is indeed how it happened. She simply didn't have time to prepare the gift and plucked the branch. The young lady asks if they will go to the tree now. The priest says he must warn. The sacred tree is infected. A little later, the girl approaches him and realizes that it is true. She's shocked, wondering how such a tree could possibly be sick. The king angrily asks if they're taking care of the temple. One priest falls to his knees, bows his head, and begs for mercy. He blames himself as a guardian, but the high priest assures him that nothing could have been done. The tree is old, it was on fire, and everyone remembers the Demon King. The main character remembers this bastard, and what happened when he turned 70? The Demon King burned countries, plunging people into eternal sleep. Because of him, the girl also fell into eternal sleep several months after regaining her memory, and then the demon simply vanished. The priest says that since then the tree has only grown weaker, and they cannot help because they do not know divine illnesses. The guardian says that it is still his fault and his life is worth nothing. But he is ready to take responsibility for the ruined celebration. The main character understands that he is talking about responsibility, although he has not done anything in advance. The young lady says that they will talk about punishment later because the holiday can still be saved. The king asks what she plans to do. The girl replies that she will prepare a medicine and request access to the herb storage. The king agrees, and the former queen supports the idea. The young lady leaves, promising to return soon. A little later, she arrives with a test tube and says it's ready. The goddess is pleased and believed in Lottie. The goddess is confident it will help, but asks what kind of medicine it is. The young lady only smiles, and she thinks it's not a cure, but poison. The goddess is shocked and doesn't understand what she's planning. The young lady explains that it is a bottle of ink, and she was unable to make the medicine before, but she realized something. Sometimes intense pain can heal. The goddess screams in horror that the sacred tree will perish and that this is sacrilege. But the young lady calmly looks at the tree. The high priest nervously asks if everything will be all right. The girl assures him that she does and asks him to infuse divine power into the tree. He agrees. But he warns that his illness may prevent the power from working. The young woman is confident that everything will work, but he will have to exert maximum effort. The man replies that he understands, and he and his assistant begin to use divine power. They give it their all. Some notice that the disease is receding, but the young lady says that even more strength is needed. The tree blossoms, turns green, and the girl announces that the shrine is healed. The priest suddenly says that the Lord himself is calling him, and the keeper asks him to come to his senses. The goddess is amazed and finds this incredible. Now, in her opinion, the girl can heal any tree. But the young lady says no. Now she declares that a new relic must be created. The goddess asks how, since she is now just a sprout. The girl asks if the relic is an object touched by a god. The goddess says yes, and that once touched, the object becomes sacred. The protagonist confidently declares that everything will work out then, and breaks the branch. The goddess, shocked, asks what she's doing. The girl replies that she will wrap the god around a branch. The goddess is completely confused. The main character begins to wind the sprout, and the goddess complains of back pain. After a while, the sprout tightly wraps around the branch and begins to shine. The king and the former queen are surprised, and the main character says that everything worked out. The priest asks how this is possible, and the young lady says that in a dream yesterday. Detome came asking for help and explained the method. The goddess was outraged and said it was nonsense. But the priest weeps in praise to the goddess Detome. The young lady assures that deep faith will always be rewarded, and mentally asks the goddess how to use the reward. The priest says the goddess will soon enter the new relic. The protagonist agrees. The goddess is indignant and calls the girl a liar, and the main character tells the priests that she's just tired and asks if she can leave. Then she picks up the goddess-themed item, and the goddess asks where she's going. The king says that if she is tired, then she should return to the palace and take care of herself. The young lady replies that she is a little tired and needs a short rest. The man agrees and says to take care of himself. He can return at any time. The main character looks away, nods, and they leave. When the girl is alone, she says she can finally breathe. The goddess asks if the emperor is a member of her family, and she's surprised by how warmly he treats the girl. The young lady wonders what the goddess means. The goddess says that Lottie had bad luck with families before. Either she was an orphan or had strange people around, so let her enjoy this life and not think about falling into eternal sleep. The protagonist asks if the goddess was watching her. She replies, of course. She worried about Lottie, even though she couldn't help because of her contract. The girl understands she wasn't alone, and she always thought she was fighting alone, but in fact, the goddess was nearby. The goddess asks why the girl carried her away. She suggests hurrying and returning for a blessing, but the young lady says there is business and she has promised a reward. The goddess agrees and asks what Lottie wants, because gratitude is a must. The main character asks if the goddess is really even happy about this, and she asks about her desire. Lottie tells the goddess not to worry. Even if the relic is damaged, they can make a new one. The goddess is amazed. The residents begin to be surprised and invite everyone to come and see. The sacred relic shines incredibly brightly, and people say that the harvest this year will be enormous. Some believe that Detome admires the piety of the emperor and the high priest. And the young lady thinks that the goddess is just angry because she broke her back. The boy asks his sister what she was doing, and the girl replies that nothing special. The main character looks at the prince and princess and realizes that they are pretending as if they did not hear anything. She says that she only noticed the damage to the shrine and was unable to do anything, but the high priest managed to cope. The young lady is glad she came up with an excuse in advance, otherwise she would have been closely watched. She remembers asking the high priest to tell her the whole story and her knowledge from the dream. The man said that the Detome temple would always be on her highness's side no matter what happened. The young lady considers this to be great news and thinks that it will not matter even if the relic is dropped a couple of times. But each relic carries not only divine power, but also the power of a specific god. Where there is a relic of the sun, there are many sunny days. Where there is a relic of wine, they make the best wine, and the relic of Detome brings abundance. Any crops grow well, so the girl is going to grow medicinal herbs and become healthier. But suddenly she is surprised, because she notices a familiar person in the crowd. She thinks she can't know anyone here, but she sees a familiar silhouette. The priest wishes Pandarion eternal prosperity and peace, as well as well-being for the temple of Detome. The young man tells his sister that it's all over. The young lady wonders if it was really the same man, and if he's still alive. The girl runs off somewhere, and the young man asks her in confusion where she's going. Lottie makes her way through the crowd. She asks people to move aside and shouts for that person to wait. After a while, she breathes heavily and tries to understand where she is now. She stops at the fence, wondering what will happen if she goes further, but at that moment, someone addresses Her Highness and tells her that this is forbidden territory. The main character turns around, thanks the lady, but doesn't know how to address her. The girl comes closer and introduces herself as Mrs. Floyd, or more precisely, Marquise Floyd, named Amelia. The young lady understands and remembers the Floyd family, realizing whose daughter this is. She remembers the Marquis and realizes he's far from the best man, so she needs to get out of here quickly. Lottie says she's glad they recognized her, and he's about to return. But when the girl takes a step, the Marquise blocks her path. Lottie tries to move away, but the Marquise won't let go. The girl asks what she wants. The Marquise turns to Her Highness and says that of course, she wants to talk. The main character realizes that she was following her and asks what she wants to say. The girl asks if Her Highness really doesn't remember her and suggests that they get to know each other again, as if everything were starting over again. The lady with pink hair says that her name is Amelia, and she considers herself to be Her Highness's best friend. The main character thinks she's hearing complete nonsense, and it sounds terrible. Amelia insists they used to have lovely tea parties and go out of town together. She adds that Her Highness even bought her a dress, and the main character tries to understand what she is talking about. She remembers that recently she only had 4 dresses and wonders if she really gave her a gift when even the food in the palace was almost gone and only sprouted potatoes remained. Now the young lady says that everything is as it should be because they were close. The girl replies that yes, it turns out that it is true. Amelia reminds her that Her Highness gave her a necklace. She doesn't wear it often, but it goes with all her dresses. Lottie thinks that one look at her and admits that something like this really could have happened. Amelia happily says that she knew that Her Highness would answer exactly like that and looks very pleased. The girl squeezes the young lady's hand tightly, causing pain. Amelia insists she was very worried and asks if Her Highness has even forgotten about her. Then the girl says that nothing terrible happened, their relationship will not change because of this, and Her Highness is still her best friend. The main character turns to Lady Floyd and says that her behavior is disrespectful. The girl is surprised and asks if Her Highness is really talking about her. Lottie replies that, because she is young, she probably has little training in etiquette. She tells Lady Floyd that she is not her friend. They may have been close before, but not anymore. She wonders who dares to touch a member of the imperial family first. Amelia is surprised by these words. Lottie confidently states that no matter how high the status of an aristocrat, the Marquise has no right to touch a member of the imperial family. She adds that the girl should remember her place and asks if she knows Baron Leold Dean. Amelia replies that she knows him and is curious why Her Highness is asking about him. Lottie says she heard talk of Baron Dean embezzling the imperial money and jewels. Among them was a precious necklace presented by His Majesty the Emperor. The girl, her hands shaking, asks Her Highness to clarify what kind of necklace it was. The main character replies that it's a beautiful pearl necklace. The lady with pink hair looks amazed. She suddenly says that she remembered something urgent, apologizes, and hurries to leave first. Lottie realizes she was just making an assumption and was wondering why Baron Dean wasn't afraid of Marquise Floyd. She wonders if it could be Lady Floyd. This necklace was a gift from the Emperor and actually ended up in the hands of Marquise Floyd. The girl admits that all of this is very annoying. After some time, she returns to the palace. The boy points his finger at something and asks his sister what it is. The main character approaches the window and tries to understand what he's talking about. The boy points to a branch. The young lady says it's nothing special, just some kind of fertilizer. The young man replies that the fertilizer looks very strange. The goddess in the world of gods is almost in tears at the way her artifact is being treated. The protagonist realizes that since she and Akron became closer, they've become much more affectionate. She asks the boy how things are with His Majesty. The young man replies that he recently went on a short trip with his father, and his father promised to give him a sword if he performed well in fencing. The young lady smiles and remembers that the boy used to call his father His Majesty, but now he says Papa. The Emperor, albeit belatedly, tries to improve their relationship and constantly sends the girl gifts. Sometimes he understands her, sometimes he doesn't, but one thing is clear. His insomnia can no longer be ignored, and his condition during rare meetings seems worse than she thought. He needs to start taking his medication, otherwise it will get even worse. At that moment, someone knocks, and the main character asks to come in. A boy enters the room, greets Her Highness, and sees Akron, who looks at him coldly. Lottie asks what happened. Raven tries to answer, but the prince interrupts. He demands an explanation as to why the boy came to his sister's palace, but at that very moment, the main character lightly hits him on the head. The young man is surprised and asks why she did that. The young lady says that's not the way to talk to strangers, and that it's better to ask her sister who the boy is. The guy agrees and does as she says. The main character nods and asks them to get acquainted. She says this young man is Count Ravenssail, and she is his guardian. The boy says it is a great honor to meet His Highness. Akron introduces himself as the second prince, still looking coldly at the boy and asking why he is wearing home clothes and whether he really lives here. The main character replies that yes, Misela is her maid and Raven is always by her side, so they live together. The prince cries out that he too wants to live with his sister. The young lady calmly asks why he doesn't leave his vast palace and move in with her. She then turns to Raven again and asks what happened. The boy says he doesn't understand something in the textbook, and the young lady asks what it is. The guy shows the right place, and the main character explains what should be there. The prince, watching, grins, and asks how old the boy is. The boy says he is 9, and the prince looks at him confidently. He declares that his older brother will teach the little Earl everything. Raven thanks him. Akron says they'll look at the assignment together, shows them how to do it, and asks if it's clear. Raven says it's not quite clear. The protagonist understands that Akron is interacting with someone her age for the first time and hopes they will become good friends. The prince assures her everything is fine and is willing to explain again. He explains again, but Raven honestly admits she doesn't understand. At that moment, someone knocks, and Raven wonders if it's Betty. She asks if there are any rolls left from breakfast and if the maid can bring something to snack on. The maid informs Her Highness that the prince has arrived, and the boy enters the room. Akron notices that it is Prince Leonard. Raven also greets His Highness. The main character gets up and asks what brought Prince Leonard there. He replies that he wants to speak with the young lady, then looks at Akron and notices that she has a guest. The young man is surprised and says they were just about to move to another room. The prince asks if this is true and says it was a lucky coincidence, apologizing. The protagonist replies that no, and the guest doesn't need to leave. She doesn't know what happened, but she believes that an uninvited person has no right to decide who leaves. Akron turns to his sister in shock and says that this is His Highness Prince Leonard, and he didn't come for no reason. The main character replies that she understands everything and that Akron is more important to her. The young man is embarrassed and admits he has one more thing to say. He whispers to his sister that Leonard always comes with business. The girl replies that they arranged to meet with Akron. She understands that he's been studying diligently for several days, so he can spend the whole day playing with her. She wonders if it's possible to accept Leonard, who showed up unannounced because it looks wrong. Akron says he's fine, and she'll just tell him everything later. Then he says they'll move to another room. When the two leave, the protagonist turns to the crown prince and asks what happened. He says he heard that her personality has changed a lot and notices that she has become closer to Akron. He acts awkwardly, and the main character replies that they spend a lot of time together and support each other. The crown prince falls silent, and the young lady thinks the conversation is going well. Then she asks what really happened. The boy asks if she's fluent in the ancient language of Lundo. The girl, shocked, wonders who told him and assumes it was the former queen. He confirms that this is indeed the case. Before leaving the palace, she told him to talk to Lottie because she could help him solve his problem. The protagonist says that it seems like he has a request, and the crown prince confirms this. The young lady admits she doesn't fully understand, as there are likely people in the palace who own Lundo. She asks why he came to her of all people. The man says he can't get help from the palace scientists. The young lady asks if the magic tower needs help. He replies that yes, and the girl assumes that this is very secret information. The young lady understands that the imperial palace, the temple, and the magic tower all have their own power. Even if relations are now normal, he still cannot invite the scholars. The man asks what else she's realized. The girl asks if this is really a temporary secret. She thinks that if it had been strictly secret, the empress would not have sent him to her. The crown prince admits that she is right and remarks that she has become much smarter. The young lady says she was born a genius. The young man agrees and says he just didn't notice it before. He says that he has an ancient book that he does not want to share with the imperial family or anyone else. If she helps, he will reward her and keep her knowledge of the Linda language a secret. He understands that she wants to live in the shadows. The young lady smiles and says that His Highness is smart. The boy calls himself a genius, and the protagonist asks what happened. He asks if she knows anything about magic. The girl replies that she knows a little. She says the key to magic is creating your own circle, learning spells and other circles, and constantly discovering new things and regaining lost knowledge. The young lady asks if he's found a spell book in Lundo. He confirms, saying the author was fluent in Lundo, but his attempts at translation have been unsuccessful. The girl wonders where this ancient book is now. She is shocked to realize that the book is in a magic tower, and does she really have to go there? The young lady thinks he must be crazy. Teleportation is quick, but it's too difficult. She declares she won't go. However, the prince says that His Majesty the Emperor has heard that she is looking for a good medicine. If she translates the book perfectly, he will give her a leaf from the world tree, which is kept in the tower. Hearing this, the main character immediately asks when they'll leave. A short time later, she's already breathing heavily on the way. The maid turns to Her Highness, asks if everything is all right, and suggests that she take a little rest. The crown prince says that the tower is not far away, and it is better to get there and rest there than to stop along the way. The girl agrees and says Prince Leonard is right. It's about 2 hours to the tower, and the enemy can use the teleporter, so the distance between the teleporter and the tower is much safer. There's a magic circle in the tower, but only wizards can use it. The young lady thanks the maid for her care. Betty replies that it's nothing and asks if the mistress would like some water. The girl says everything is fine and asks if the maid needs anything. Betty confidently replies that no, and she's fine. The crown prince suggests they move on. He wants to get there faster. The young lady agrees. They drive on. Leonard turns to Lottie and says that her maid still has a lot to learn. He adds that a girl shouldn't be overly friendly with the servants. The young lady asks if this is true, and the prince says the same applies to Akron. If you spoil him too much, he won't grow up. And it's strange when a maid feels too free around the imperial family. The main character wonders what he's even talking about and decides that they'll discuss Betty later. The girl insists that in private conversations, she will behave as she sees fit. Akron is still a child and needs to be cared for before he becomes part of the imperial family. The prince says she's speaking of things she doesn't know. He adds that those at the top need dignity above all else. The girl replies that such people need support more. His Highness says that's not true, and she'll soon understand everything herself. Lottie senses something is already happening. She notices that this is why the prince is nervous. The girl wonders if a 20-year-old fifth circle mage can't live peacefully. The young lady wonders what might explain his actions. The carriage jolts violently, and the girl jumps up from her seat. She lets out a soft cry, falls on top of His Highness, and says she just fell. The prince asks if she's okay, and she replies that she is. Then she touches him and decides to check. The young lady uses her powers to examine his magic circle and sees a crack. This circle collects mana from the heart. A crack means the mana is leaking, and the owner cannot develop further. Sometime later, Prince Leonard is met by magicians. One says he's heard of a man fluent in the ancient language and asks if they'll finally get a translation of the book. The guy replies that this is true and that the former empress personally recommended her. One of the mages says that Her Majesty's opinion can be trusted. The prince extends his hand to the young lady and introduces her. This is Lottie Pandarion. She is the second princess, and this child is his translator. The mages are shocked, wondering if this is really the same foolish princess. After a while, the young lady's maid simply gets angry. She says the lady just arrived, and they made such faces, and calls them stupid as potatoes. The main character thanks the girl for her support, but says that if she helps them even once, their opinion will change. The young lady realizes that all this won't go beyond the tower walls. Betty asks the princess if she's feeling better. The girl replies that yes, the medicine and rest helped. She also realizes that the wizard helped her recover very easily, and Leonard only watched. It seems his problem with the circle is serious. At this point, someone apologizes to Her Highness and asks permission to enter. The girl grants permission. A magician comes into the room and asks how she feels. The girl smiles and says that thanks to him, she feels much better. He's happy and apologetically asks if she can start translating. The young lady is surprised by the interest in her skills. The man explains that they weren't expecting her arrival and therefore thought poorly of her. The protagonist understands them. Just recently, she was a nobody, and now she's arrived as a translator of an ancient language, so their doubts are understandable. The young lady says that everything is fine, because the strength of magicians is their eternal curiosity. The man notes that Her Highness knows these words. The girl replies that yes, she's read books about the tower's history, and the phrase has stuck with her. The magician says that this phrase is actually the tower's ideology: endlessly research and endlessly practice. The girl adds that one must endlessly marvel at the truths of the world, and then the answer will come. The man didn't expect her to remember everything so well and says she is a good person. He's confident those below will soon understand. The girl thanks him for her support. The man asks her to follow him. They walk down the hallway. The girl notices how much has changed and dreams of being back in her lab. They pass by paintings. The man says these are of the outstanding people who led the tower. Without any of them, the tower might not exist today. The main character looks at a painting and asks if it's the Archmage Carmel. The man replies that yes, she is an 8th Circle mage and an expert in ancient magic. It was she who restored most of the tower's ancient magic. The protagonist sheepishly says he's an outstanding man. The man confirms, adding that Leonard admires her more than anyone else. The heroine is surprised and thinks Carmel was a commoner. She wonders if she really is his role model. The magician asks if that's really so surprising. The girl says she just thought he'd look up to others, pointing to the portrait. She asks if that man was not the greatest magician of his time, since he could easily use high magic. The man says that this is true, but Leonard still likes Archmage Carmel better. The young lady asks why. The man explains that Carmel created magic for everyday life, not just for combat. For example, a spell to cast a small light in the dark, or magic to find a village if you get lost. Back then, these spells weren't considered anything special, and the mages were aggressive. But as Carmel's magic spread among people, the image of mages in the tower changed. Even First Circle mages could use its simple spells, so many flocked to the tower, and it grew. He adds that she was also strong in offensive magic. The young lady silently asks him to stop. The man says Leonard dreamed of meeting Carmel. The girl is embarrassed, realizing she can't admit this is one of her past lives, and asks him to stop. The main character says they should hurry. They're expected. The man agrees. They enter the room. The magician says they need to come here. One man says they've arrived. The other says they've been waiting for a long time. He hands over a book and says that it is an ancient book that needs to be translated. The protagonist is shocked to realize it's her diary. It records how she ate a seasonal stew and how delicious it was. The restaurant closed after the building collapsed due to the earthquake, and this was unexpected. But she and other regular customers opened a new restaurant. although the owner looked puzzled. Before falling into eternal slumber, the owner admitted she was glad the closure meant she could stop working. But because of them, everything had returned. However, she couldn't give up the delicious stew. The young lady now realizes that instead of translating, she would simply like to burn the diary. The mage asks Her Highness if she can translate the book and says she can take as much time as she needs. The girl replies that yes, a little time will suffice. Then the young lady remembers that she deliberately wrote in an ancient language so that no one would understand. But for the sake of the leaves of the world tree, translation is necessary. She reads on and sees a recording of Roy, heavily drunk, telling her about magic. She tries to remember what exactly. Now the young lady remembers the magic of dragons and Pendrade. It was a red dragon. They were friends, but they often argued. He had been sleeping for hundreds of years, and Roy was the name he used in human form. The girl understands that in order not to forget the ancient dragon spell, she wrote it down there. The source of magic is dragons. The first spells were knowledge passed on by dragons to humans. The young lady wrote it all down and is now a winner. At this point, His Highness asks if it's too difficult. The girl replies that anything is possible. The guy says that he will keep her abilities a secret and is even ready to swear in front of the tower. Lottie replies that there's no need. She'll translate everything. One of the mages informs His Highness that nothing happened in the tower today. The young lady thinks it would be nice if that were the case. She decides to give it a try and continues reading. Instead of hangover notes, she finds a dragon's diary. Roy is the diary's owner, and Pendrade is the dragon's name. One of the mages is shocked to recall rumors of the dragon's friendship with a human before its sleep. The girl says that there are rumors that the diary was a gift to a person, but in the text the address is Dear Doris. The girl admits that she is not very good with formulas and will try to rewrite them carefully. She understands that there is magic there for hangovers and for leg pain after long walks. Two magicians watch the girl write and say that the formula and language are perfect. They note that it literally reeks of ancient magic. The girl silently asks them to stop. Another mage apologizes and says they're worried. It's dragon magic, and it's the first time something like this has happened since Archmage Carmel. The girl understands that dragons are extremely rare now, so this kind of magic is a real novelty for them. The young lady hands over the sheet of paper and says it's the last one. The man thanks her. His Highness looks at the notes. The young lady realizes he's searching for a way to fix the crack in the circle. If she had the powers of her past life, everything would be simpler. But healing Leonard requires at least the 8th circle. She thinks only the tower's master is capable of this, and wonders who the master is now. His Highness asks if everything has been translated. The girl replies that this is all she could, and if she missed anything. The main character notices a strange flower and tries to figure out what it is. It says her laboratory is to the right of the golden arrow. The young lady wonders if it was the weed or the alcohol. The magician suggests they call it a day and asks Lottie to get some rest. The girl asks if she can take the book with her to read in her room. The two mages tell Her Highness that of course, and there is no need to rush. A man offers to escort Her Highness to her room. The Crown Prince apologizes and says he's heading to his room. The young lady enters the room and addresses Mr. Padrell. The man asks what's going on. A young lady asks where the Tower Master is now. The man replies that it is he, Padrell Galania. The main character, shocked, asks if this is serious and thinks that he is not at all like the previous masters and is too young to be the head of the tower. The master says that he is not actually young, but that training can do wonders for one's appearance. The girl decides that something else is more important now and says she has something important to tell him. She knows Leonard's condition. The man is surprised. The young lady says she found out by accident. Leonard doesn't know. The master says he understands and asks why she brought it up. The girl replies she hadn't mentioned it before. An ancient book describes a method for repairing a cracked circle. The master asks if it's true. The young lady confirms and says the topic is a bit dangerous. The master offers to have tea with him. The young lady accepts with a smile. They come to his room. He hopes she likes it and says he can hand over the World Tree leaves the day after tomorrow. First, he wants to make sure the translation of the ancient magic is accurate. The girl agrees. The man asks Her Highness how the circle can be restored. He's genuinely interested. The girl says she first wants to know what happened to Leonard. The master considers whether to tell. The young lady says there's no need to worry too much. She's not here just for the beauty of the tower. Leonard is sleeping now, and the girl says that's true. The man confirms and asks if she knows a man named Aldo. Lottie replies no. He says Aldo entered the tower with Leonard. They quickly became friends, were the same age, and equally talented. They were sent to the tower at the same time and remained close for a long time. Aldo was a commoner, but in the tower, talent mattered more than status. He believed they would grow into great mages who would give the tower a bright future. Their strong friendship eventually began to fray. Leonard began to outshine his friend, and Aldo developed an inferiority complex. Things were made worse by Leonardo's narrowing horizons. While the prince was desperately pushing for the 6th lap, Aldo remained in 4th. The gap grew wider and wider. That's when it happened. Somehow, Aldo managed to obtain some delphinium petals. He gave them to Leonard, and fortunately the leaves did not plunge His Highness into eternal sleep. But they angered the mana in his body. The young man managed to spit them out in time, even though his circle had already cracked. According to the rules of the tower, Aldo was punished, and then everything possible was done to restore Leonard's circle. However, the situation only worsened. They had to ask for help from the archipelago and the tower on another continent, but they refused. The main character understands Leonard's attitude towards commoners and realizes that everything is much more serious than it seemed. She understands that Leonard now needs to heal the rift and broaden his horizons. If he could regain his strength from his past life for a few minutes, everything would be resolved easily. The Archmage asks Her Highness about the method for restoring the circle from the book. The young lady says it says to infuse mana until the cracked circle is completely restored. She understands that the method is crude, but it's the only one. Only one person needs to infuse the mana, and if it fails, the crack will get bigger. Padrell sighs and says it's the only option. He wants to try it himself, but he's only on the 7th circle, so the chance of success is only 50%. If the mage were higher level, it would be easier. The girl wonders if she can help. The man says it's late and escorts Her Highness to the room. She replies that everything is fine. There's a knock at the door. The young lady thinks it's just in time, says she has a guest, and goes to answer it. Prince Leonardo stands at the threshold. He asks if he can come in. Lottie says that of course they can talk alone. She closes the door and looks around to make sure there are no strangers nearby. She realizes that there is a laboratory nearby that she used when she was Carmel. The girl approaches the door and, upon touching it, senses no mana. There don't seem to be any protective spells there. It's a good thing the lab is next to the master's quarters. No one would rob a place so close to the tower master. The young lady pronounces her name and password. The door opens. Inside, everything is almost the same. She thinks the thing she needs is somewhere here. She finds a bottle of potion and thinks with a grin that it's time to set Leonard's mind straight. The tower master tells Leonard that he sincerely hopes he doesn't give up magic. It's the path he loves and has walked for so long. The boy tells the teacher that it was very difficult for him. The man replies that he knows, and that because of Aldo, he had to go through a lot. The young man counters that it's not like that. He was going through a hard time even before Aldo's betrayal. By the 5th circle, he thought he'd reached a pinnacle that others would reach in their lifetimes. He believed he'd become a great archmage. But one mistake led to another. After several such mistakes, he was ready to plunge into eternal sleep for the sake of the 6th level. He gritted his teeth and continued, because Aldo was supporting him. And he was right. If you don't rise above, you could be stuck there for the rest of your life. As a result, the circle cracked, and a cure has not been found for a very long time. The young man tells the teacher he can't take it anymore. The master asks him to calm down and says he needs freedom from this burden. But the boy cries out that he doesn't know what to do anymore. Looking around, he sees only darkness. At that moment, a man bursts into the room and shouts that everything is wrong. It's Lottie with the potion. The master is surprised and asks if she hasn't gone to her room. The girl replies that she found something better. She has a gift for Leonard. He wonders if it's for him, and she opens a jar of potion. She pours it on the prince's head. The man screams at her, and Leonardo falls to the floor. Opening his eyes, the young man sees a woman greeting him. He wonders if this is Archmage Carmel, and why she's here. The woman says the weather is nice and asks his opinion. The guy looks at her, confused. She slaps him on the shoulders and tells him to get up and not waste the time that the other she gave him. The young man is confused and wonders what this other she means. He asks what he should do. The woman asks if he knows what two magicians do when they meet. She says they're fighting and begins casting a spell. The young man, shocked, realizes she's casting a spell wordlessly and screams that he can't cast a spell. The woman replies that he can. Otherwise, he will fall into eternal sleep if he doesn't act. The boy tries to create a barrier, but her attack destroys it. He thinks that if he were on level 6, everything would be different. The woman asks if he thinks he could handle her on level 6. If he's on level 6, then she's on level 7. She attacks again, and the young man is hit with many blows. She says that if he were at level 8, she would use level 9, and asks if he knows his problem. She claims he's neglecting what he's already accomplished. The young man tries to object. The woman tells him to appreciate what he has now and to remember it. The young man almost cries and agrees. The woman asks what he sees before him. He replies that he sees the sky and his pitiful reflection. She says that's good, and it's time to set his mind straight. The master is shocked in real life and asks what Her Highness has done and what that red liquid is. The protagonist says it's hard for her to explain, and she can hardly breathe. The man realizes that a minute ago she felt fine, but now it's as if she's falling into an eternal sleep. The girl falls down and tells Mr. Padrell that it is a secret miracle, and he asks her to assume that something like this won't happen again. The man says he understands. The girl says okay. She adds that the prince will not give up his path and wanted to ask for a favor related to today in the tower. The man says nothing happened. He doesn't understand what happened, but he's confident it won't happen again, and he believes the girl saved him. He says that it was surprisingly quiet in the tower today and asks you to agree with this. The girl says she agrees, it was quiet, and leaves. The master wonders if it really is a child in front of him. Before, she seemed like a naive girl from the palace, but now he sees in her a person with a lot of experience and understands how many amazing things there are in the world. A man approaches Prince Leonard, intending to move him. When he touches him, he is shocked. He realizes Leonard's magic circle has been restored. Meanwhile, the protagonist walks down the hallway, breathing heavily. She senses how hard it was. She used the red liquid hidden in Carmel's life. Based on this, she created several mana-boosting elixirs and finally cast an illusion spell. This allowed her to meet Carmel. If she were to be reborn in the body of a gifted mage, this red liquid could prolong her life. But she spent it all for another man. Her first thought upon seeing the bottle was to keep it all for herself and pretend she knew nothing. But she's grown up and softened. Now we need to be careful. The reason for her poor condition is simple. Carmel's red liquid wasn't enough, so she added her own, so she had to create the illusion of Carmel herself. It was only an illusion, but his body still felt strained. It seemed everything had gone well, and Leonard's thoughts had cleared. He opened his eyes and would no longer abandon the magical path. The young lady felt very tired and decided to rest for a while, closing her eyes. Opening them, she realizes her head is spinning. A boy is standing in front of her. He calls her teacher and asks why she saved him when she could have let him fall into eternal sleep. The girl says that adults should help children and guide them. The boy is her only student and he must cope. With tears in his eyes, he says that the teacher can't die, she is a genius and must live. But the girl asks Lionel to take care of himself and plunges into eternal sleep. The young man vows to find a teacher. The protagonist wonders if she told him about her reincarnation. She jumps up and screams, "No!" Betty asks if Miss Lottie is okay. The heroine realizes she has just fallen into eternal sleep. She lies in the cold rain and does not understand who this maid is and how she knows her name. She wonders why they call her Lottie and whether her name remains the same after reincarnation. Betty asks to wait a minute. She is going to call His Highness Leonard. The young lady thinks of names and addresses Betty by her first name. The maid immediately turns around and smiles as she speaks to Miss Lottie. The main character remembers that Betty is indeed her maid. She asks not to invite Prince Leonard. Betty asks if she's sure. The girl replies that yes, she just woke up and was confused. She asks for a glass of water. The maid hands her water and asks her to drink it slowly. The young lady does so and sighs with relief. She asks how long she lost consciousness. The maid gets angry and says that her mistress speaks as if she knew she would fall. The young lady wonders when Betty became so smart and says that it was just a premonition. Betty says the lady of course didn't know, but for some reason she decided to sit down right in the hallway. The girl says she hates it. The maid leaves and slams the door. The main character wonders if she's really offended. Betty opens the door again and says she didn't mean to slam it so loudly. It was the wind. The young lady smiles and realizes that she dreamed of her first life, and Lionel appeared there. This young man is her first and last disciple, probably because of the man she saw in the temple. He looked like his apprentice, only older. They looked alike, but they were different people, since Lionel had fallen into eternal sleep 1,000 years ago. At that moment, someone approaches Her Highness and asks for a moment. She recognizes Podrell's voice and agrees. The man comes in, apologizes, and asks her to lie down, knowing she's feeling unwell. The girl says yes and asks for his forgiveness. She asks if something is wrong. The man says he wants to thank the young lady first and bows. He thanks both the tower master and Leonard's teacher. The young lady says nothing happened in the tower. The man replies that nothing happened and he will never forget it. The heroine thinks that both the temple and the tower are now on her side. Then she asks why the Archmage has come. He says he'll start with the important part. Leonard's condition has improved, the circle has been restored, his body is filled with mana, and he will become stronger in the future. The main character is delighted. The man gives her a container and says it's a gift for Her Highness. The girl asks if these are the leaves of the World Tree. The man confirms. She looks at them. She realizes that these are genuine leaves from the World Tree. She tried so hard to get at least one. The World Tree is enormous and unique, something she has never seen in any past life. It grows among high elves. Elves are divided into 3 types. The first type is well known, and she was even born one of them. The second kind are the dark elves. They are said to be corrupted by the power of darkness. She hasn't seen them, so she can't say for sure. The high elves were left for last. They are the most haughty and seem almost immortal. They rarely interact with other races and never leave the lands around the World Tree. One day, a girl accidentally discovered the bark of the World Tree and nearly died at the hands of a squad of pursuers. She has since given up and still can't believe everything turned out that way. The young lady looks into the box and wonders what it is. She turns to Mr. Podrell, and he confirms that she is right and that it is the fruit of the World Tree. The protagonist is shocked and says she was only promised leaves. The Archmage explains that the fruit is his personal gratitude and, having heard of her poor health, asks her to accept the gift. The heroine joyfully kisses the box and says she will accept it with great gratitude. She then asks Mr. Podrell where he got such a thing. The man says he doesn't know if she'll believe him, but once upon a time he helped a man lying by the road. The heroine wonders what kind of road this is, where the rights to the imperial throne are practically handed out. The girl asks if it was a high elf. The man replies that no, it was an ordinary girl, and she was on her way to her parents' house to see her child. She ran out of money and was in trouble. He helped her and took her to the port of Shirov. The heroine asks if he actually took her there. She understands that the port of Shirov is a place where ships depart for other continents. The man says that he received this fruit for his help and believes that the girl inherited it from her distant ancestors. The young lady understands that this is possible, and that even the most arrogant elves sometimes come out into the human world. The man notices he's been quite late and apologizes. The young woman says it's okay and that his story was interesting. Padrel informs him that Leonard will be visiting tomorrow. He's meditating now. The young lady says she understands. She recalls that the red liquid has left his body brimming with mana, and it's only logical that he's creating a new circle to keep it from escaping. The man suggests that she get some rest. When he leaves, the heroine rejoices and realizes that everything worked out. She received not only the tree's leaves, but also the fruit. Now she considers how best to use them and remembers Roy's words. The young lady remembers that the best way is to dry the leaves and brew tea. After a while, the maid enters the room and asks permission. The girl replies that she can. She asks if Betty can boil water. She replies, of course. After a while, the heroine is already brewing tea from the leaves. The maid is surprised and asks what it is, as the aroma is very pleasant. The heroine agrees. It's the first time she smelled anything like this. Delicate, cool, and refreshing. A wave of nostalgia washes over her, a strange sensation. The heroine invites the maid to have a drink together, and she agrees. They begin drinking tea. The young lady is a little surprised by the sensation. The maid says all the weariness of life seems to melt away and she feels lighter, so she asks Miss Lottie what she thinks. The girl considers whether to talk about lightness and fatigue, and realizes that the sensations are even stronger. She feels like she's about to fly or run a marathon. She realizes that even a mandrake potion wouldn't have produced such an effect, and that the leaves of the world tree are best for her. She wonders why the leaves of the world tree are one of the most difficult medicines to obtain. They cannot be bought at any price. What's even more surprising is that she is an ordinary person, and the best medicine for her is a byproduct of the world tree. Every race has its ideal remedies. Dwarves prefer remedies based on roots with strong earthly powers. Mermaids are suited to water-based medicines, while humans benefit from high-quality, larger quantities of medicine. The maid turns to Miss Lottie and asks if everything is all right. The girl says yes and wonders when they will be leaving for the palace. The maid replies that His Highness Leonard is currently busy training. She asks if the mistress wants to wait for him and return together. The heroine thinks no. Leonard will be strengthening the circles for a long time, so going together won't work, but she needs to see him and will come later. When he finishes his meditation and goes to the emperor, she will come too, for she must plead with him to save the world tree. She understands that she will return to the imperial family as soon as possible. After a while, someone asks if Princess Lottie has left the palace. The servant replies that yes, she left this morning, and Prince Leonard departed with her. The man asks what they are talking about, and the servant says that they assume the destination is a magic tower, but the reason for the trip is still unknown. The servant asks if he should send spies. The man replies that if the mages catch them, everything will end badly. The temple and the tower are too powerful and cannot be made enemies. But if the tower's wizards themselves reveal the reason for the princess's visit, that's a different matter entirely. The man insists that's exactly what he should expect. The servant agrees and says that he will question one of the magicians under the guise of discussing money. The man thought about what a nasty creature Lottie Pandarion was. He was sure he could easily deal with her, and no one would suspect anything about her plunging into eternal sleep, given her sick body. He recalls telling His Majesty that he couldn't do it and didn't even know whose child it was. He realizes he could have easily isolated the girl and then simply crushed her. But the young lady unexpectedly cleared her name of the poisoning accusations and attracted the attention of the emperor. She dealt with Baron Dean and caught smugglers in an underground gambling house. He had to pay for it, but the damage was small, and then his stupid daughter made a mistake. The girl asked how she knew the pearl necklace was a gift from the emperor. The man recalls telling his daughter not to accept the baron's gifts, but to give them to him directly. Now he needs to fix everything. He tells his servant to finish the job by the end of the day. The young man asks if he's sure, since he himself recently said he shouldn't go into the magic tower. The man says that this is true, but they have nothing in common with those stupid monsters. The main character tells Leonard that she heard that the training ended at dawn and asks how he is feeling. The guy replies that he feels great. The young lady thinks this seems true, but still wants to check. She asks the prince for his hand. The young man agrees and extends it. He looks at the young lady and says that Lottie looks a lot like her. The girl thinks she should let him figure it out for himself. Sitting in the carriage, she asks if he knows that Padrel told him about one thing. That Archmage Carmel was a commoner. The crown prince is surprised, then smiles and says he understands. He says goodbye and promises to come to the palace after his business. The main character leaves with her maid, saying that 20 years is a long time. The maid asks what she's talking about. The heroine replies that everything is fine, and thinks that in 10 years, a new Archmage will appear. She understands that he will be on her side, and then she will be able to turn to him whenever she wants. Betty says that the expression on Miss Lottie's face frightens her. The girl asks if they have enough company. The heroine agrees, realizing that she asked him to keep her knowledge of the Lundo language a secret, which is why there aren't many people. The maid says it's no problem. It's not far from the palace to the teleportation circle. They're on the tower grounds, and the mages will quickly help if anything happens. Betty smiles and asks if she told Miss Lottie about Raven last time. They continue talking, but the carriage suddenly shakes violently. The young lady asks the knight what happened. He replies that there was a problem with the teleportation circle. The young lady asks what the problem is, and, looking out, sees the circle and thinks someone has damaged it. She doesn't understand where the responsible mages have disappeared to. She is struck by rough marks made not by a sword, but by blunt objects. At that moment, something sharp hits the carriage and the maid screams. Then he faints, and the heroine worries about Betty and hears strange sounds. Someone is shouting, demanding that a person be put into eternal sleep, and the young lady wonders where the orcs are coming from. There are about a dozen of them, impossible to defeat, but at least she can survey the situation. She notices the shape of their helmets and the patterns. These are the Takun people, but the girl does not understand why they left the village and attacked the tower. She runs, climbs higher, and decides that she will figure it out later. Now she needs to do something else. The young lady loudly says in their language that she is Meru's daughter and hopes that it will work. She knows that before, as an orc, intelligent beings and spirits knew of her essence and listened to her stories about people. But she fell into eternal sleep just when she revealed herself as Meru's daughter. The orcs are astonished. One says he thought so, the other says he believed it. The heroine thinks the situation is even funny. The orcs ask who this man is. The girl says that she will not explain herself to the boy and asks where the tribal leader is. The orc asks if she's a wanderer. The girl confirms and again inquires about the chieftain. The orc is angry and says the great leader has fallen into the flames. Humans set fire to their villages 4 days ago, and even children and the elderly were forced to swing swords. The young lady wonders who was so mad as to set fire to the village of Takun, and why. She remembers that their land is Bahel. For people, it's a wasteland filled with monsters. Enough noise, and they come running from all over the area. The young lady says she understands, and asks where the wounded are. The orc replies that he heard the wanderer no longer makes medicine. He says that she was an orc, now a human, and how can one trust that a wanderer will not betray them? The girl understands him and thinks that people suddenly burst in and destroyed the village. She comes closer and speaks. What will help them? The young lady remembers gratitude, because the Takun tribe once helped her, and now she wants to repay. The orc agrees and says that the wanderer is precious, and if he is taken, there will be problems. The girl looks at one of the orcs and says that it is not a problem. The orc picks her up and says it'll be faster. The young lady asks him to wait, she's getting swayed. But the orc says there's no time. After a while, the young lady climbs off him, feeling a bit ill. The orc says they've arrived. The young lady looks ahead and asks if this is a cave. Then she steps inside and sees orcs. One of them, in shock, asks if this is really a person and throws a stone at her. Another orc declares that she is the chieftain's guest. The orcs are surprised, and the heroine soon enters the chieftain's presence. The chieftain addresses the wanderer. The girl hears pure human speech and understands that he is truly the chieftain. She says she heard a little from the warrior and wants to know more. She asks what happened. The chieftain speaks of a surprise attack. The warriors were lured out, then the grass was set on fire, and the fire spread instantly. They were forced to flee, but the people didn't give up and pursued them. The young lady asks if they were really being pursued. He confirms. As soon as they reached this place, the pursuit ceased, but the chieftain doesn't know if the people will return. The healer fell into an eternal sleep along the way, and the children and elderly suffered greatly. He asks if the wanderer will help them. The girl replies that they'll leave everything to her and asks for a few warriors, as she's an herbalist. After a while, the orc says he's brought some herbs. The main character gets angry and says that she asked for leaves with sharp ends. The edges are smoothed out here. The orc says they're all alike. And the girl realizes she asked for medicinal herbs, but they're giving her poisonous ones. At this point, another orc approaches and says he's brought more. The young lady realizes these are the very herbs she needs. The heroine asks if he collected them carefully and praises him. The orc is embarrassed, and the heroine thinks how cute he is. Another orc tells the wanderer that he brought water from that very spring. The young lady confirms that he can be trusted. She understands that this used to be a training ground for a magic tower, and knows the area well. It's now a restricted area, but almost nothing has changed. At that moment, one of the orcs shouts that the people are chasing them and have already come so close. Another orc grows angry and asks where they are, as he's already on his way. The young lady calmly replies that there is no need to worry and tells the warriors to return to the cave and await her orders. The orcs are confused and wonder what to do with the enemy, since he's so close. The young lady confidently says she'll deal with them herself. Meanwhile, one man insists that the area needs to be combed. His charge asks the captain why they need to do this, since they were ordered to drive the orcs toward the magic tower. The man confirms that this was exactly the order, but the person who gave it is capable of making aristocrats out of them. The man is stunned and asks if they can really become nobles. The captain thinks so and tells himself that he too is worthy of the title, for he is smart and understood the gist of the order. All that remains is to get rid of this mudblood. He's sure the girl is right there. The orcs have been herded in to deal with her. All that remains is to verify the results, and it's a good thing he has something in reserve. After a while, one of them screams and calls for the captain, because there's a child there. The young lady quietly admits she's scared. One of the men says that there must be orcs nearby, and they need to be found first, but the captain orders them to stop, because the real target is this girl. Someone remarks that her clothes look expensive, indicating she's from a noble family. The captain calmly tells the boy not to worry, as they'll get away with it. They approach the young lady, and the girl asks them to save her. The man steps forward. The ground beneath him suddenly drops away, and the protagonist grins. She realizes that this is where they used to practice intermediate-level earth magic. Everything seems normal, but a large hole lurks in the center. The man, finding himself in the pit, screams, wondering if she'd lured them in on purpose. The girl calmly confirms that's exactly what happened. The captain is indignant and asks if she really thinks they won't get out. The girl replies that the hole is deep, and there are a lot of them in there. She adds that she's curious if they'll get out alive. The captain calls her and begs for mercy, promising to tell her who ordered the hit. The young lady apologizes and says she already knows who it is. Then she turns to Okul, points to the guy she was talking to, and says he's the boss, and to bring everything he has. The orc angrily jumps on the guy and shouts that the people were chasing them, so they need to be taught a lesson. Once they've finished with the humans, the orcs ask the wanderer if the bodies need to be removed. The girl replies no, she'll clean up the mess herself. The orc cries out that they're returning to the tribe. The young lady, sorting through the humans' belongings, thinks there must be something useful among them. She finds a coin and realizes that bandits shouldn't have such a thing. At this point, the young lady turns to one of the orcs and asks if he'll stop pretending. She notes that it was he who found the necessary herbs, although he should not have known their type, and that he also speaks the human language perfectly. The young lady says that it is time for him to show his true face and calls him Lionel. The boy returns to his true form and tells the teacher that so much time has passed. The girl recalls their first meeting. He had sunken cheeks and bony hands. He could have fallen into eternal sleep right before her eyes, but his eyes shone with life. Now the girl says she's glad he's okay. The boy replies with a smile that it's thanks to the teacher. He says he couldn't have survived childhood without her. The girl replies that he could have managed without her. The young man objects and says that it was only thanks to the teacher that he survived, because he had no one and no one helped, and she was the only one who did not turn away. He says she's the only one he has. The main character remembers him as a child when she sees his smile and asks Lionel how he survived. She understands that he should have plunged into eternal sleep long ago and wonders why her student is alive, and his body returns to its original form again and again. The young lady notes that this is strange. Only certain gods are permitted to extend human life, but neither the chief god nor Ditame told her. If they had created someone like him, they would have revealed his secret. Then one thought remains. The young lady asks if he received his power from an evil god. She knows that even before she was born, the nameless god tried to put his father, the chief god, into eternal sleep. But he lost, was defeated, forgiven, and banished from the divine realm to earth. There he allied with earthly evil and became an evil god. The young man says that he understands the teacher's concerns and assures her that her student is not so simple. The guy snaps his fingers, a flame bursts into flames in the pit, and he reminds her that he promised to definitely find her. Lottie realized he had used magic without a spell or delay, and was, most likely, a 10th circle mage. He had disposed of the undead bodies in an instant. Lionel says he's taken care of the bandits and the teacher can return safely. The girl agrees, but the boy adds that he's forgotten something. He asks her not to trust the gods too much, especially the Supreme Being. The protagonist asks why. The guy says it's strange. He's been looking for a teacher in this body for so long, but they couldn't meet. Each time he found her, she was already dead. Her body remained warm, as if she had just fallen into eternal sleep. The young man asks who so skillfully put her into eternal sleep. After these words, the boy leaves, saying they'll meet again. Sometime later, the young lady comes to the orcs in the cave and says that the herbs should be applied to the wound and wrapped in cloth. She also gives him other herbs and tells him to steep them in boiled water and drink them. The orc says he understands, and the girl asks to see the chieftain again before leaving. The orc asks the young lady to follow him. The girl approaches the chieftain, and he thanks her. The main character replies that she did not come for gratitude and asks if he is thinking of going to Mentre. It is a wide area near Kronos, sparsely populated, and ideal for a new settlement. One of the orcs asks why Mentre. The girl replies that she knows who lives there. She understands that if the orcs give this man what he wants, he will not betray them, even though it will be costly. She says she'll talk to him, and he'll give them land and help them build a new village. The girl thinks she's to blame for their misfortune, but one of the orcs says they refuse. The young lady asks why. The orc replies that they've lived here for generations, will find their place, won't leave, and will fight. The young lady says the humans will definitely return. The chieftain replies that they know. People will persecute, bring troubles, but the orcs will fight because it is their pride. The girl understands that their inflexibility comes from pride, and this cannot be changed. She says that it's fine, but asks to accept the materials that she will send through a friend, and refusal is not accepted. The chieftain asks the wanderer to wait. The young lady asks what's wrong, and the orc explains that there was a minor earthquake in Kronos recently. The girl notices that this happens there often and asks what they are afraid of. The chieftain replies that Pendrade is waking up. A short time later, the girl says goodbye to the orc and thanks him. The orc says they won't forget her because she saved the tribe. The protagonist is surprised, then says it all happened because of her. She understands that if she hadn't gone to the magic tower, the Marquis wouldn't have contacted the tribe. The orc exclaims that this is not so. Bad people attack, they are victims, and so is she, so she shouldn't blame herself. The protagonist is surprised. Then he smiles and tells them to head north when the wounded feel better. There's a forest there where they can find shelter. Sometime later, the young lady returns to the site of the magic circle and sees it already being restored. One of the knights shouts that the work is almost complete. The girl notices herself nearby and realizes it's an illusion copying her. The young lady dispels the spell and approaches where she should be. The knight runs up to her highness and says they can leave right now. The girl agrees and says they are leaving. The young lady asks what's wrong with the orc tribe. The youth replies that they've been pursued, and it seems they've gone east. The girl understands that the knights were sent in the opposite direction, and Lionel even took care of this. The young lady thinks that the bandits are experienced and left no traces along the way, but the territory of the magic tower is a place where any speck of dust can be found. She is sure that traces of people will soon be found, so she asks to do it instead of her. The knight says the magic tower has prepared a new carriage to replace the damaged one. The girl thanks him, gets into the carriage, and reflects on how much has happened. She found the diary, brought Leonard to his senses, met with the orc tribe, and learned of her friend's awakening. And also about Lionel and the gods. The girl realizes she knew about their connection to her immersions in eternal sleep, and decides she should prepare. Returning to the palace, the girl says she doesn't want to work. 4 days have passed since returning from the magic tower, and all this time she's simply been lying down. She thinks that even if the gods unite with the evil spirits, she will not move from her place. Like Pendrade, the small earthquake is just a sign that he stretched sweetly in his sleep, and she knows him better than anyone. In other words, doing anything now would be a waste of energy, and she was ready to rest for the rest of her days. At that moment, someone addressed Her Highness. The man apologizes for disturbing her peace, but says it's urgent. The protagonist asks if it's a letter. Seeing the imperial seal, she says anything but that. The woman says the young lady's guess is correct. The girl cries out that this can't be true, and the maid asks if she should open the letter first. The girl reaches for the letter, opens it, and reads that the new year has arrived, the time of peace has returned, and the emperor has learned that she is worried about the bad news. It was decided to hold a ball, and the main character realized that the social season had begun. This is the time when single people go to parties looking for a partner, and debutantes are usually present, although she was an exception. But the young lady is a member of the imperial family, and this is her duty, however unpleasant. This morning, she had to go shopping for a new dress. The woman asks if the girl really dislikes the social season so much. The young lady replies that, yes, she dislikes crowds and doesn't know what to talk about. Besides, she can't dance at all. Liana, shocked, asks if the mistress really can't dance. The girl replies that yes, she's never learned. The woman agrees, because the lady has not attended dance classes, but still does well, so she thought that dancing was within her capabilities. The young lady asks if Liana could teach her. The woman apologizes and says the first song has already been chosen, but she doesn't know it. Then she finally finds a solution and says she'll ask her friends. Miss Whitney is a dancer, knows modern dance, and is an excellent teacher. One song won't be a problem. The main character asks if Miss Whitney will have time. She assures him she will, since Miss Whitney is Duke Marcus's head governess. Lottie wonders who it is and then remembers the guy and his past. During the first emperor's reign, she worked as a doctor in the palace and often saw the constantly injured Marcus, who was too clumsy for a knight, so they communicated a lot. Even after her return to Kronos, he often wrote letters, telling her how lucky he was to have received a promotion, and would share the details when they met. The young man also wrote that he had a beautiful child and asked him to come quickly. The girl understands that this was his last letter, as the following year he fell into eternal sleep during the war. The woman says that Duke Marcus is currently at the estate with the prince and princess, so Miss Whitney has a lot of free time. The main character is delighted. The interlocutor adds that the Duke might visit her. The protagonist asks why. The maid explains that the Duke has been ill for a long time, and Miss Whitney knows a lot about medicinal herbs. The protagonist understands how they met. After some time, the girl finds herself near a simple family home and asks if they have come to the right place. The woman confirms and says that the store is run by seamstress Miller, and the atelier is now the most famous in the capital. The main character notices that the atelier gets a lot of orders during the high season and asks if that's true. The woman replies that it does, which is why she signed up 3 years ago. The girl is stunned. A worker greets them and introduces himself as Taylor Will. The man asks for confirmation of his date of birth and personal stamp to verify his reservation. The woman agrees, and the young lady is surprised that everything is so serious. The young man asks to wait a little and promises to bring drinks. The main character asks if the woman is really willing to give up the reservation she's been waiting for so many years so easily. The maid says it's the least she can do to help her mistress. The main character feels awkward and wonders whether they will agree to make a second dress for Miss Sayla for an extra fee. At this point, another woman enters the building. The worker says this is not allowed, but the woman claims she also made a reservation 6 months ago. The man replies that it's not her turn yet. A pink-haired lady enters the room, and the protagonist realizes who it is. Milia smirks and says she hasn't seen Her Highness Princess Lottie in a while. The girl thinks about that meeting and remembers how Her Highness accused her of stealing a pearl necklace during the celebration. The Marchioness is sure that such a gift could not have come from Baron Dean. Because of this, she had to sit in the mansion for a month, and she does not intend to leave Lottie alone. The main character looks coldly at the girl. The Marchioness turns to Princess Lottie and asks if she has anything she wants to say. The young lady wishes her well. The girl shouts that no, she got the wrong information again. Lottie asks what she's talking about and if she's forgotten something. The girl screams that she's talking about His Majesty the Emperor. The man asks him not to do it here, but she says it's too noisy. She pushes the worker, who falls and hits the furniture. The main character watches in shock. The pink-haired lady asks how a commoner dares to interfere in the conversation of aristocrats and whether he is on equal terms with her. The young man wants to answer that this is so, and the girl wonders if this is unfair. After all, commoners live under the protection of the aristocracy and lead carefree lives, and there is nothing surprising about this.